As all members have received a copy of the call for tonight's meeting, the reading of the call will be omitted. At this point, I'd ask everyone to rise, and I am going to ask Dan Kelly, a senior at Greenwich High School, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Dan Kelly. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Welcome to the September meeting of the Greenwich Representative Town Meeting. My name is Tom Byrne, RTM moderator. As all members have received a copy of the minutes of our June 9 meeting, the reading of the minutes will be omitted. I do have one change to make. This is on page 8, relating to item 17. That resolution offered by the chairman of our anniversary committee, Despina Faciliotis, was in fact a substitute resolution. So that change will be made. That in fact is the only change that I have to offer. Is there any other suggested correction to the minutes as proposed? Ms. Kroeb, District 8.
Mr. Moderator, I rise to request that the vote count for item number 2, the High School Building Committee, be corrected according to the voting cards. The total affirmative vote on that should be 153 and was reported as 151. Thank you.
Okay. We did check with the town clerk who counted the vote, and we are informed that the vote was 151 in favor. So I cannot accept that motion. Further suggested changes to the minutes of our June 9 meeting? Hearing none, and absent objection, the minutes as amended stand adopted upon unanimous consent. Irf Porter, member of District 6.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We've passed out a press release that provides some details on Boys and Girls State and the notable accomplishments of this year's delegation and previous delegations. Livy Florin, the co-chair of the Boys and Girls State Commission, and I are both products of the programs. So are, and as I call your name, I would like to ask those that are in this room who have been to Boys and Girls State to stand. Steve Walco, Rich DePretta, Greg Fruman, Dean Goss, and Steve Meskers. Did I miss anybody that's been to Boys and Girls State? Then would you please so indicate and make sure I get it right next year? Congratulations. I think you would hear from any one of these people that they're proud to be giving back to the community, just like Livy and I are. We know our delegations are made up of extraordinary young people and that they can compete effectively in any venue. But just to be sure that they have the best that we have to offer, Tom Byrne holds a forum for them on parliamentary procedure. So they go forth understanding the fundamentals of the language that they will use for a week and perhaps have a little edge. My job tonight is to introduce them to you, as we have done every year for the last few years, to make sure that we recognize their accomplishments, and to offer a very brief resolution on behalf of all of you to recognize them and to extend our appreciation and admiration. Now, we don't have everybody here tonight because, as you can appreciate, if these are the leaders of Greenwich High School, they're busier than one-legged cats in a sandbox. Okay? From your left to right, on the stage before you are our 2008 delegates. You can read more about them in the press release that we handed out. Susanna Barron, Courtney Brand, Eliana Carmona, Marcia Foti, Jacqueline Hay, Kathleen Lunn, Padmini Parthasanathi, close, okay? Michael Driddle, Daniel Kelly, David Goldstein, Scott Marshall, Leighton Moskowitz, Colin Peck Gray, and Thomas Sassos. The Greenwich delegation was chosen by the American Legion Post 29 Commission to represent their high school and their community. The selection process is competitive, unique to Greenwich, and the delegation is chosen from candidates chosen by their high school housemasters. The Commission interviews all candidates who are selected based on scholastic records and achievements, citizenship, leadership, community contributions, and interviews. This year, Dan Kelly, who you had introduced to you by the moderator, put a spotlight back on Greenwich as a result of his election as the Boys State Governor and his selection to attend Boys Nation. Dan first was elected a state senator by his town. During his party caucus, he demonstrated his leadership by clarifying party issues and positions and rewording into appropriate party platform planks, thus gaining support of the party. That caucus work got everybody's attention. Bear in mind, this is a stranger group that comes. 300 boys, 250 girls. Stranger group, and you make this kind of an impact in the first 2 or 3 days. So as a result of that, he got everybody's attention. He was chosen to be the party nominee for governor. He won by 6 votes. David Goldstein of Greenwich was his campaign chair, and Michael Driddle was his speechwriter. So Dan's election and selection as one of the 2 Boys Nation representatives at the Boys Nation program in Washington were proud moments not only for him and for his family, but for all of the Boys and Girls State delegation. Lee Moskowitz was also recognized for his achievements, receiving the Mary Alice Cameron Award, which, quote, to the boy who in his political activity adheres to the highest principles and ideals. For in doing so, he gives basic substance to the science of government so necessary for the retention of a democracy. Last but not least, according to Boys State staff, Colin Peck Gray pretty much ran the Boys State newspaper, which was a daily, single-handedly. We're very proud of all of our delegations, and a special congratulations to Dan Kelly. I would now move, Mr. Moderator, that the RTM show their appreciation and admiration of the 2008 Greenwich delegation by standing and giving the delegation a hearty round of applause. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Porter, and congratulations to the delegates to both the Boys State and Girls State conventions. And thank you to Livy Florin for all she does as well. The chairman of our 75th Anniversary Celebration Committee, Despina Vasiliotis of District 11.
That's a hard act to follow. But I want to let you know that our celebration is going to be a memorable one, as well as a historic one. In keeping with our history of celebrating the 25th and 50th anniversary of the first meeting of the RTM, October 16th, 1933, our 75th anniversary celebration is serving as a gathering in camaraderie of present and former members of the RTM and in pride in being part of the history of a historic body. Since this is the last RTM meeting prior to our celebration, I want to publicly thank the RTM 75th Anniversary Committee for their patience and participation. They gave up their time and came to many meetings with me throughout the summer, spanning the months from our inception in late April until today and continuing until October 19th, the date, as you all know, of our formal celebration. For the record, they are Jerry Anderson, Louise Bavis, Jim Boutel, Carl Carlson, Carol Ducrette, Karen Vasiliotis, Suzanne Geis Robbins, Bob McKnight, Miriam Menon, and Susan Morton Elliott. I also want to thank the food liaisons of each district, and especially Susan Morton Elliott of District 9, my food chairman, who are painstakingly making sure that district tables will reflect the generosity of the members of each district. You have all received our formal invitations, as have as many past members as you have helped us identify that we have been able to reach. If any of you know of former members that have not received invitations, please let me know and they will be invited. If there is any oversight, it is not intentional on the part of our committee. We have asked all district chairmen to help us identify these former members and ask you to provide current addresses of those former members. Some districts did a better job than others in providing names and current addresses, and we have had about 50 returns out of almost 700 invitations sent out. We have heard from many former members so far who have indicated how delighted they are to have been remembered and are coming. They are eager to meet with present members. It's up to you to not disappoint them. Last week, Tom Byrne and I emailed a request to the chairman of all the districts to poll their members so that we can have an approximation of how many of our present members will be coming to our celebration. So far, I have heard from 4 districts, and their numbers together are overwhelming. However, I especially want to thank my district, District 11, for its support in every way imaginable, including the free services of our official photographer, Michael Chait. And I particularly want to thank District 7 for all its support. For my daughter Karen, who served as my secretary and has turned a booklet on the history of the RTM, which I researched and updated, from an ordinary booklet to a work of art. To Valerie Stouffer, chairman of District 7, whose pointed questions helped me formalize my thoughts in reaching out to all of you. I also want to congratulate and thank Valerie for bringing together her district in such amazing support of our celebration. So far, District 7 has more than 40 members and their guests attending, and that doesn't include former members. Their esprit de coeur is catching and has made me want to work harder to make this affair worthy of their enthusiasm. At our celebration, and only at our celebration, we are distributing a booklet on the history of the RTM. It amazed me to see how much of our history would have been lost if this booklet was not researched. Did you know there was no paper color copy of the Greenwich coat of arms available, even though the original coat of arms was in color? Al Manelli and his staff made a digital color copy of the Greenwich coat of arms for our booklet that is now available for town use. I am still looking for original photographs of Al Varner Jr. and George S. Griswold, 2 of our former RTM moderators. That's 2 out of only 6 moderators in a 75-year span. I haven't been able to find their original photographs in any of the archives and have to rely on copies of copies. If anyone can help me locate original photos of these 2 moderators, please get in touch with me immediately. Researching the booklet also made me realize how fortunate the town of Greenwich has been in having produced so many historic RTM former members that contributed to the successful running of this amazing town. And now each and every one of you will be a part of that history. All of your names will be listed in that booklet. Also at our celebration, and only at our celebration, we are distributing another historic first to all those attending. I will hold what that is as a surprise. In conclusion, I know we have not reached the RSVP deadline, but I'd appreciate it if you reply as soon as possible, ASAP in today's lingo, so that we can know how many of you will attend. It will determine how many booklets we print and how we will set up the affair. Suzanne Geis Robbins, one of the 2 RSVP numbers listed on the invitation, was unexpectedly called out of the country for 2 weeks. I would appreciate it if you reply by telephone to me. If you prefer, please reply via email. My email address is wdfast@yahoo.com. I am listed in your RTM pamphlet under District 11. Even if your district chairman sends me a total number coming from your district, please reply individually to the RSVP, even if it's with regrets. Include your district number in your reply. With your participation, the RTM 75th anniversary celebration is going to be a great historic reunion and commemoration. Don't miss out on being a part of it. Thank you.
The RTM owes a great debt of thanks to the work that the entire Fasiliotis family has done, in particular Despina and her daughter Karen of District 7. So a real hearty round of applause of thanks to the work they've done. Thank you. Now, let me just say a few words, if I might. This event is going to be one of the grandest reunions that Greenwich has ever seen. We were able to, over the summer, compile a list of every member, every individual who ever attended an RTM meeting from 1933 to the present. We are going to have our wall of fame with everybody's name on it in alphabetical order, and in each district, everybody's name with their years of service. So we're going out to the community. We want all our current members, but we also want all former members to come, find your name on that wall of fame, talk to the current members, and share your recollections of your experience in the RTM. And you may learn some interesting things. Do you know which former moderator appeared on the cover of Time magazine? It's probably not who you think it is. And do you know which of our current members was the earliest to join the RTM more than 45 years ago? Also, not who you think it is. But you can learn all of these things if you come to the event. There's going to be some discussion of the history and mingling of current and former members, and it should be a wonderful event. So we welcome you. We look forward to it. That's October 19th. And again, to anyone who did not get an invitation, any former member or family of deceased former member, you are all invited. And that email for Despina was wdfass@yahoo.com. So let us now move on. Our first selectman, Peter Tessie.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator and ladies and gentlemen of the RTM. I want to thank you for the opportunity to update you on some of the matters before town government. But before I do that, I would like to take a moment to say something of a more personal nature. Yesterday, the Town of Greenwich longest-serving employee, Consumer Affairs Coordinator Anthony Tony Belmont, passed away after a lengthy battle with cancer. Tony's career with the town spans some 59 years, and he left an indelible mark on his colleagues for his good nature and love of our town. Tony's wife, Paula, is on staff in the First Selectman's office. Anyone who wishes to express their condolences may send an email to her at pbelmont@greenwichct.org or stop by the Selectman's office and sign a condolence book that will be given to her. As you may have read in one of the local newspapers, as we look toward the financial outlook facing the town, facing the country, and looking at the challenges that we face as families, I have asked the town department heads and the Board of Education administration to look carefully at their 2008-2009 budgets for any opportunities at finding economies and efficiencies in this year's budget. Why am I doing this? The town, not unlike all of us, is feeling the impact of the economic condition we are living in. Higher than budgeted costs for utilities and commodities, lower than anticipated revenue due to property tax settlements with the private golf clubs, and lower interest rates on our cash balances, and a limited contingency due to reduced revenues and higher than expected interim requests last year are just some of the factors impacting this year's budget. The outlook for 2009-10 is also challenging, with lower fund balance, possibly higher pension contributions due to investment performance, ongoing property tax settlements, and the depletion of the parking fund, which will require any shortfalls to be covered by the general fund. What can we do? Currently, all vacant positions are reviewed by the First Selectman's office for approval to fill based upon justification by the department head. We will delay filling some of these positions as a means by which to realize some savings to offset the anticipated budgetary increases. This particular action is not unlike other municipalities in the state of Connecticut. You only need to turn to Fairfield to see that they employ this same mechanism, and it will serve as an aid to realize some budgetary savings and offset some of these increases. Department heads have been asked to look at their non-salary accounts to see if they can conserve some of these funds to help address the current situation. By no means can this be categorized as a fiscal crisis, but if you take into consideration the factors before us, reduction in revenues and an increase in expenditures left unchecked, it puts us on a collision course. Therefore, practical steps today can avert such action tomorrow. As we look ahead at 2009-10, working with the BET and the RTM, we will have to redouble our efforts to allocate these finite resources more carefully. On the capital budget, planning for the 2009-10 CIP is just beginning. A public hearing is scheduled for next Wednesday, September 24th at 7 p.m. in the Town Hall meeting room. Comments on the 2009-2010 CIP can be sent via email, and we've established a new address to make it more accessible and easier for you to communicate. You can send it to CIP2009@greenwichct.org. We have sent out to over 60 homeowners associations and community groups the capital plan that is currently proposed. That's in the current budget. That's the point of departure from which we begin to work. We've sent that out with I've sent a letter delineating the purpose of the meeting and that this is the first step in the community-wide capital planning process. The amount we have to allocate for projects in the upcoming fiscal year is projected to be less than prior years. Of course, I want to be clear, this is exclusive of the Nathaniel Witherell Project Renew, which is self-funded over 20 years. But the BET is looking at the model for 2009-10, and it's evident based upon our financing structure that we have to pare back the amount we expend in 2009-10. So therefore, projects impacting public safety and those required to meet a federal and state mandate will receive higher priority. Only priority projects can be completed in the year in which they are funded will be given greater ranking. This is something that's been reiterated in the past, that only request the funds for projects in the year in which they can be accomplished. It's very common sense, it's very practical, and that's what the BET has reiterated, and I think candidly some of you in this audience have indicated. So we are beginning the process. It's one that will involve some changes to the CIP process. The committee has not met, but will do so to refine some of the assessment criteria and then begin the several month-long process. Turning our attention to the outdoors and our beaches, I have requested the Director of Parks and Recreation provide to the Board of Selectmen by October 1st a report addressing all the issues raised during the 2008 season as it relates to impact on island access by non-residents. This review will include input from the Greenwich Police Department, Marine Police, and look at matters across the board in a prudent and wise manner. Stormwater management. On October 6th, I convened a meeting of all the land use chairs and the DPW commissioner to obtain a shared understanding as to responsibilities in tackling this problem. The solution must be multifaceted and will require regulation changes, compliance and enforcement, remediation, and funding for capital projects of the highest priority. Ongoing, the members of the Land Use Agency's staff and the Department of Public Works will continue to address many of the issues that they have identified through the various assessments, and again work with the proper officials through the capital budgeting process to request funding for solutions to some of these problems. This is an issue that will require, in my estimation, tens of millions of dollars for it to be properly addressed, and it will not be something that will be achieved overnight, but it will be over a period of time. I have every confidence in our new Commissioner of Public Works, Amy Siebert, that she will play a vital role in helping us address this particular challenge. In the area of active recreation, after 10 years of discussion, the Board of Selectmen has submitted a request for municipal improvement to the Planning and Zoning Commission for the Coscob Power Plant site. This proposal includes a multi-purpose playing field suitable for field sports. There has not been any addition of field capacity in this town since the private effort undertaken by residents at the Greenwich High School approaching about 8 years ago. At the same time, we've seen a proliferation in the interest of sports events as a whole. I am pulling together a group of several citizens who I have exchanged ideas about to develop a strategic plan regarding adding further capacity in our field inventory. I will be convening this group of citizens in a planning exercise early next month. The outcome will be to determine what is the current condition of our fields, how compatible are these fields to the needs that have been identified? What do we need to do to address the demand, and what options do we have, and are there alternatives? I'm hopeful that this exercise by a broad representation of recreation stakeholders will translate into a citizen government partnership to improve recreational fields and their availability and condition. Finally, an update on Central Greenwich, the Senior Center and Board of Education administration facilities. I know there's been a lot of news stories on this and a lot of email traffic, and quite candidly, there's so much detail on it that I don't think anybody really has it straight. So I'm going to do my best to at least give you what is the current status so you have a foundation on which to develop your thoughts. After completion of the senior programs needs assessment, we have developed the program needs for the seniors. They require 25,000 gross square feet for their program. The space does not fit into, their space needs does not fit into the Old Town Hall Senior Center. The program would fit into the Havemeyer building. That facility has 42,000 gross square feet. Any decision on the future of the Havemeyer building rests with the Board of Education and Schools Administration. Currently, there is an assessment of their needs. Initial estimates place their space requirements between 20 to 25,000 square feet. At our Board of Selectmen meeting last week, Board of Ed Chairwoman Nancy Weisler said that the study to determine administrative space requirements is being worked on by the Geddes Partnership, and they've completed the first phase, and they're anticipating the second phase to identify possible sites will commence very shortly. The final results may not be known until the end of this year. At the same time, the Greenwich Center for the Arts remains interested in utilizing the Havemeyer building for a performing arts center. Discussions have taken place about sharing space with the senior program, and two conclusions have surfaced in these discussions. The seniors desire to be in one centralized location to maximize their program service delivery and operating efficiency. So people want to know, where did your money go in looking at the senior needs? It went to arriving at that determination. So we know how much space they need, we know they want to be in one centralized location, and we know that that is for several reasons. One, service delivery and operational efficiency in terms of ongoing dollars to fund their program. Therefore, again, the Old Town Hall does not work for that purpose. The Greenwich Center for the Arts program, as presented, is designed on a business model that enables it to operate on a sound financial footing, which means they're willing to open their programs to seniors for participation, but cannot provide a preferential use. At least that's the sentiments expressed to date. They cannot do that and achieve the financial viability as currently presented in their plans. So after many hours of meetings and discussions on this subject, it is abundantly clear all decisions about the future for our senior center, occupying Havemeyer, and the prospect for a performing arts center at that location are really in the hands of the Board of Education. They do have legal ownership over that facility that has been determined by town council. I was advised early on to essentially evict them from their building. And while the thought is interesting, the facts are I don't have the legal authority to do so, and I don't want to get involved in a landlord-tenant dispute. So we will continue to define and refine the options. There are limited options, but what is clear is we have 2 buildings with 3 prospective uses, and 2 of these uses we are currently providing for. So any decision will have to address how the future of these 2 facilities will be utilized, and also take into consideration the financial limitations we have to fund the programs that we're committed to, which to date are, again, the seniors. We currently provide that, and also we do have to provide for schools administration. So simply stated, the conversation is active, it's ongoing, and while it's taking longer than I would like, I am not in a position at the moment to drive the bus as it relates to the future home of the seniors, other than to say my personal opinion, and I say this openly in front of everyone, is I hope that the decision is that the administration for schools can be found elsewhere than right in the central business district, because those are 2 valuable facilities that I think the community could better utilize for their use. So I thank you for your time this evening. There are a plethora of other issues before the town that I would love to talk to you about, but I imagine you want to get on with your business.
Thank you.
You can you can contact me at ptessie@greenwichct.org. But again, thank you for the time.
And the final administrative matter, we have Michael Petroselli of District 12, who is the chair of our Budget Overview Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Michael Petroselli. I'm a delegate of District 12. I serve on the Budget Overview Committee and act as the chairperson for that committee. Peter really gave me a great segue for what I hope to talk about tonight in hopefully 3 minutes or less. What I want to do was give everyone an update as to what our committee is doing and what we have done, what we hope to do in short order. We really spent the spring looking at our mandate based on the RTM rules, and we're trying to match up our actions with that mission statement. I'd like to read briefly a few of those points, give you some color as to what we're doing and what we hope to present going forward. The first one, I'll come back to this point, is it says our responsibility is to act as an advisory capacity to the RTM and its committees with respect to the budget. I'd like to come back to that one. Second one is reports on the development of the budget for the coming year, giving reports at strategic points in the budgetary process. This we're going to do. I don't know that it will be every meeting. I want to make sure when we get up here it makes sense, it's useful and helpful. But what I want to avoid is that when we all show up here in May, and most of us can't understand this book, right? It's big and thick, and even if you look through it, and I spent a lot of time on it last year, it's hard to understand everything that's happening. What we want to do is present some of the highlights, make sure we understand the themes, options, and implications of decisions we make here in May, but hopefully we're educated before the May meeting. We're supposed to coordinate the analysis of the budget for the coming year with the budget subcommittees. We're supposed to study and report to the RTM in a timely manner for district and other standing committees consideration any potential improvements in departmental organizations. Every year we've done meetings with many of the departments and how they operate. I don't think we've always done a great job of communicating that to this body. Hopefully we'll do a better job of bringing that information to the body here in a timely manner. We're also supposed to identify specific areas of the budget upon which to concentrate its analysis, coordinating with other standing committees. As part of that, we've created some subcommittees on the Budget Overview Committee, looking at things like CIP, the CIP process, energy management, town spending, education. So we hope to come back with real ideas, real information, and real recommendations. Finally, work with the members of the BET to jointly develop acceptable budgetary targets annually. I can tell you we've had really great dialogue with Steve Walko and Mike Mason. They've been really great partners with us. Every question we've asked, they've brought us great information back. They're anxious, it seems like, for our ideas, and we're looking to work together with them, so I really can't thank them enough. Back to the first point. Shall act in an advisory capacity to the RTM. The first process, or the first item we did, hopefully everyone received an email with a description put together by the committee. Really, most of the work was done by Louisa Stone. It's a one-page document. It describes the capital improvement process, and some of the points are who is on the CIP committee. I don't think most people here really know who that is. How are ideas presented to the committee, and who presents those ideas? How the projects are ranked, and how the scoring system works to rank those projects. Also, we talk about, there's a hearing process, and Peter talked about the first hearing scheduled for September 24th at 7 p.m. in the Town Hall meeting room. I'd encourage you to take a look for this document. Hopefully you received it in your email. If you didn't, and you want to let me know, my email address is Peter, ETRUCE, @mindspring.com. I'll send you this one-pager. I hope to come back to you in October with someone else from the committee. We'd like to talk about, from a high-level point of view, about some budget items, talking potentially about labor costs, forward-looking debt levels based on the town's 10-year forecast, and also taking a look at broader implications of the decisions we're making here in the near future. I think in December, we're going to come back and talk about last year's number 1 and 2 items on the CIP plan, and Peter mentioned this, and that's stormwater management and its effects on the town budget. And again, the goal is we'll come up here for 5 minutes. We would have given you some information before and touch on some highlights that hopefully this will create some dialogue, and you all will come back to us with questions and ideas that we can then study and all be better prepared in May. So I appreciate your time. My name is Michael Petrucelli, mpetrus@mindspring.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That now brings us to the call for tonight's meeting. And as I informed our district and committee chairs, based on the reporting districts and committees, it will be my recommendation that we combine the following items for voting purposes. And this will be combined items. There is no consent calendar tonight. The combined items that I will recommend are item 3, 5, 6, 7, 9, 11, 13, and 14. And if in fact we do combine those for voting purposes, that would leave the following items to be considered separately: 1, 2, 4, 8, 10, and 12. So at this point, I will recommend that we suspend the rules and combine items 3, 5, 6, 7, 9, 11, 13, and 14 for voting purposes. Is there such a motion to suspend the rules? It has been moved and seconded to suspend the rules and combine items 3, 5, 6, 7, 9, 11, 13, and 14 for voting purposes. The motion to suspend the rules is not debatable and not amendable, and it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. All those in favor of combining 3, 5, 6, 7, 9, 11, 13, and 14 for voting purposes, please signify by saying aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. We will take up the combined items first and then proceed with the separate items in their numerical order. Now, I have also put on the table outside the auditorium sign-up sheets for items 1, which is the appointment of Paul Marchese to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and item 4, which is the appropriation for Hamilton Avenue, the school construction project. I'll also put sign-up sheets at the front of the hall here. So if you are interested in speaking on those 2 items, please get your name on that list and you will be protected in terms of your right to speak. Okay, so we'll first take up our combined items. Item 3 is the first of those combined items, and that is offered by our Appointments Committee. Do we have the chairman of the Appointments Committee?
My apologies. Oh, yeah, these people. The Appointments Committee met on April the 8th, and we interviewed Ms. Oberlander and Mr. Warner. I believe it was a 12-0-0 vote for Ms. Oberlander and a 11-0-1 vote for Mr. Warner. The one dissenting vote, if you like, was over policy issues on employment policy. Mr. Warner, as you know, is returning to the Labor Contracts Committee after good service in the past. He withdrew himself for a period of time because he had business efforts of his own and personal matters which he felt might bring him in conflict with his duty on labor contracts, so he very graciously withdrew himself from that situation. He's now clear of that and has come back to serve us, and we're grateful for that. Ms. Oberlander is a rather extraordinary find that we have, has now joined our body from District 2. She has, as you've seen in the call, an explanation. We gave you a full explanation this time, hopefully, so you know all about these people. She has a very extraordinary record of public service and private service in these areas. She is a lawyer. I understand from my members of the Labor Contracts Committee that even though she hasn't been officially appointed, she worked over the summer with Mr. Detchen, I believe, and some of the issues before us tonight. And between the two of them, they gave a very helpful and full report. So she's up and running. So we can say no more than that to support her candidacy and hope that you'll agree with us. Thank you.
Discussion on item 3. Item 5 now comes before us. Joe Siciliano, Director of Parks and Recreation.
Mr. Moderator, members of the town meeting, I'm pleased to bring this resolution before you this evening. Resolved that the town of Greenwich accept a gift totaling $600,000 from the Junior League of Greenwich, Connecticut Incorporated for the renovation of the Bruce Park Playground.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that item 3, since it is offered on behalf of one of our committees, does not require a second, and so it was before us when made by Mr. Von Keyserling. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution on item 5? The resolution on item 5 has been moved and seconded. Pamela Frederick, Chair of our Finance Committee.
Good evening. Mr. Moderator, members, and guests. This item is the acceptance, regarding the acceptance of a $600,000 gift from the Junior League to renovate Bruce Park Playground. The item was presented by the Finance Committee by Lucia Jansen, Junior League Project Co-Chair. I came up with that title, so I hope it's okay. Sheila Keating, Junior League President, and Amy Scarvone, also of the Junior League. This was also presented by Joe Siciliano of the Parks and Recs Department. The Junior League is seeking to build a new boundless playground, much like a typical playground, but one that removes barriers, making it accessible to children of all abilities, including ample passive play areas using environmentally safe materials. It will be built on the same site, its current site. Parks and Rec will oversee the project, including equipment and the contractor selection. They plan to close the playground November 1st and target reopening the new boundless playground late spring 2009. Parking will remain pretty much the same, except existing spaces will be reallocated for 2 new handicap spaces. It has received unanimous support of the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Parks and Rec, and approval and municipal improvement from P&Z. Funding sources of the total budget of $750,000 include the previously approved town appropriation of $150,000 allocated in the 2007-2008 CIP budget, with the remaining $600,000 gift, including a Junior League direct donation of $150,000 and the United Way matching contribution of $150,000. To date, the Junior League has raised all but $60,000. Since the budget includes a $50,000 maintenance fund, which will be held and managed by the Junior League, a 10% project contingency, all of the funds needed to construct the playground are on hand, and the Junior League is confident of raising the remaining. We voted 12-0-0 in favor.
Thank you. Karen Sadekhan, Chair of our Parks and Recreation Committee.
Pamela gave some of the details. I'll try to just go over it quickly. We had the same 3 representatives from the Junior League with us, with Lucia Jensen, who serves on our committee, giving the presentation. We also had Joe Siciliano and Bruce Spayman present. Our committee had already reviewed the gift last June. We had sort of a preview of it by Lucia to get us heads up on what was happening. You've heard that this is a $600,000 gift from the league to renovate the playground. The league is partnering with Boundless Playgrounds. In doing this, the goal of Boundless Playground is to provide children of all abilities opportunities for inclusive side-by-side play by removing barriers that limit childhood exploration and development and encourages rigorous and challenging activities. For your information, there are over 120 Boundless Playgrounds designed and installed in the parks in the United States. These playgrounds have many distinguishing features which provide multiple choices for children of varied ages and abilities. You've heard the financing. The total cost is $750 with a $50,000 contingency fund for the 10-year life expectancy of the playground for maintenance. The Parks and Rec has committed $150. Junior League has committed $150. United Way matched the league and gave $150, and the league raised $240 of the remaining $300. So the playground's 90% funded. Other points: Joe Siciliano, along with Bruce Spayman, will oversee with the Junior League the playground construction and implementation. A general contractor will be hired by the Junior League using the expert help of Toe Design, the landscape architect on the project. The general contractor will manage all the aspects of the construction and manage all the subcontractors involved. All service and equipment providers are required to meet the town standards. We've heard this issue before, so that was emphasized. The Boundless Playground organization will provide the final certification that the Bruce Park Boundless Playground meets with its requirements. There are many wonderful features of this playground. They're keeping the gazebo. They're adding a boxwood hedge maze for wheelchair users. There's a little amphitheater for 30 people. There's a Native American village. And the perimeter of the toddler area will be fenced. This is just to name a few of the features. The timeline is as follows. The RTM presumably will accept the gift tonight. October, the general contractor will be hired. November to April, the playground would be closed for work. May, the state and Boundless Playground will certify the park, and between May and June, there'll be a ribbon-cutting ceremony, which also will mark the anniversaries, the 50th anniversaries of the League and the United Way. It was pointed out to us that there are 44 other playscapes throughout town that people can use while the Bruce is closed. Our vote was 12-0-0.
Thank you. Discussion on item 5. Item 6 now comes before us. John Crary, our town administrator.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, resolved that the town of Greenwich hereby supports the proposed reconstruction of Riversville Road Bridge and possible road realignment from Sherwood Avenue to 700 feet south of the bridge.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 6 has been moved and seconded. David Mellick with the report of our Public Works Committee.
I'll keep this simple. I think just to let everybody know that there was a substitute resolution for this item that was mailed out.
Could you maybe pull the microphone a little closer?
That better? This involves a substitute resolution that was mailed out with a correction on the item. And are we addressing the substitute that was mailed?
Is that what you presented, Mr. Curry, the substitute resolution? Yes, thank you.
Okay. In effect, this is a resolution for us to apply or affirm monies that have already been appropriated. It is required for the funding requirements that come through when we get reimbursement back from the state. Normally, Finance does report first, so I would say that they've reported on this item relatively well. I hope to give her the opportunity. This is an item that is actually not yet in final design. We have two options that are to be processed accordingly. The money in the budget is sufficient to cover the anticipated more expensive design, and we hope that we at least get the best bang for the buck, whichever the way our Public Works Department processes the final design aspects. Our new chairman of our commissioner of the Public Works Department, Amy Siebert, was on hand, along with David Thompson, who filled in a little later on some of the project details. We voted 12-0-0 on the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. And the only change between the substitute and what was in the call was the intro to the last paragraph, which changed whereas to now therefore be it resolved, essentially. All right, who's going next? Pamela Frederick with the Finance Committee report.
Okay, Mr. Moderator, members and guests, this item, number 6, was presented to the Finance Committee by David Thompson, the Chief Engineer, and it is not an appropriation as noted, rather it's seeking a resolution to fulfill a Connecticut Department of Transportation requirement that the town legislative bodies support the proposed bridge project. It's important to note, however, that the project is expected to cost $2.85 million, rounded up to 3, with the funding consisting of federal covering 80% of the cost and state covering 10%. So that ultimately the town would fund approximately $285,000 or 10%, a 10% maximum. That's a cap. Based on the current legislation, it's expected that any overruns would we would receive 80% funding from the federal and 20% state funding. Preliminary engineering study of the existing Riversville Bridge was funded in the 05-06 as well as the 08-09 budgets for a total of $375,000. Based on the study, Public Works will pursue 3 possible alternatives for construction with the goal of maintaining traffic flow. It's a heavily trafficked area during the construction process. These 3 options include 1, having a one-way traffic flow, probably the most disruptive for traffic. The second is relocating the bridge 20 feet west to stage construction and optimize the bridge's geometry, both for the road's line of sight design as well as water flow. And the third is to build a temporary bridge. All of these are being reviewed. The most expensive option is the selection of building a temporary bridge, which obviously has the ease of traffic flow as well as construction. The total $2.85 million budget estimate assumes this most expensive alternative. The State Department of Environmental Protection will be required an approval for each of these design concepts because each involves use of a right-of-way of land owned by the DEP. The town also had an option to pay 100% of design cost in order to expedite the project. However, I've been informed because the project was received its grant approval so quickly, this is no longer an issue, nor is it a path that the town would consider taking. Upon selection and recommendation of a design, Public Works will seek public input and will be required to obtain RTM approval of the appropriation, which will be reflective of the selected design. We voted 12-0-0 in favor as amended. Thanks.
Thank you. Vince DeMarco with the report of our Transportation Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just about nothing further to add, except that we did meet with Dave Thompson and learned all of the same things that you just heard, and we voted 12-0-0 as well.
Thank you. Discussion on item 6.
I'm sorry, Mr. Moderator. For the record, it was 10-0-0, District 2 and 4 absent. I apologize.
Thank you. Discussion on item 6. Item 7 now comes before us. Once again, Mr. Crary.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, resolved that the sum of $200,000 be and the same is hereby appropriated to be added to capital account number Z 345-59560-28023, known as the Art Barn Gym Station.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 7 has been moved and seconded. Pamela Frederick. Well, it's up with the Finance Committee report.
Okay. All right, this is the first appropriation for this evening. It's $200,000 for the Art Barn. Mr. Moderator, members, and guests, this item was presented by Al Manelli, Superintendent of Public Works. The appropriation is to fund the Art Barn rehabilitation, which is used by gyms for remote response. The funding is for a project contingency of $172,000 or 15% of project cost, and the additional architect fee of $26,000 to address redesign work. The original funding for the project was approved in the 2004-2005 budget, but implementation was delayed until the Parkway School's wells were brought up to code. A second funding of $380,000 was approved in the 07-08 budget to address total cost of a new design, which met a revised budget project cost that is based upon a bid of $862,000 versus the original design work, which was higher, that was $965,000. So we had a reduction in cost due to redesign. We'd like to see all of our projects head that direction. Based on the original design, the Historical Society denied approval to demolish the large barn located on the project. As a result, the plans are now to demolish the house and 2 small barns and renovate the large barn. Also, they will be building a 2-bay ambulance garage and breezeway. Warner Construction is the contractor, with construction scheduled, will started actually in August 08 and is expected to be completed in June 2009. If approved, the contingency would be 20% of the cost compared to what is the norm of up to 15%. While asbestos removal is included in the original bid and excavation is expected to be limited, a higher contingency was provided given the higher uncertainty associated with such brownfield construction. The Finance Committee voted 12-0-0 in favor.
Thank you. David Mellick, Chair of our Public Works Committee.
Clearly reported by Finance, thank you. The Public Works Committee met on Monday the 8th to review the item in Town Hall. Alan Minnelli was there to discuss the item in addition to Amy Siebert. We reviewed the history of the project and the impediments to prompt completion to date, but really what has happened is the system when it comes to project approval and actual starting work actually seemed to work. There were checks and balances. We had to look at issues at the wells and the adjoining properties, which would be Parkway School. We had the Historic District coming in and making a decision. And then we also had an evaluation of the space needs and so forth. The additional funds are, as noted, to cover a contingency plus the architect's fees, which hadn't been finalized with previous appropriations. Probably the most important aspect for us to recognize here as a capital project that was kind of renovation, interesting use for a subsidiary function, be it GEMS, is that the design was finalized and we actually have hard bids that we are hanging our hat on, plus full and proper contingency. If we don't spend the contingency, it comes back. If we don't have the contingency, then we're dealing with change orders. One item that came up in the committee at the chair's point was that voluntary change orders by the end user are really not to be accepted. Involuntary code required, such as what we're dealing with in Hamilton Avenue, are a little bit different. But this is where you can have real problems. So what's been bid is what's been bought is what they're going to get. And if there's overage, it comes back into the general fund. And I think we should appreciate that. So with that, we concluded on the item. And we voted 12-0-0, all districts, plus many alternates in attendance. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion on item 7. Item 9 now comes before us. Peter Tessie, our first selectman.
Mr. Moderator, resolved that the following named person nominated by the Board of Selectmen be appointed a member of the Alarms Appeals Board for a term expiring 3/31/12. Brian M. Kelly.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 9 has been moved and seconded. May we have the committee reports on this item? Mary Ferry, are you giving Dr. Evan Delman with the report of the Town Services Committee?
Mr. Moderator, Brian Kelly met with the Town Services Department last Tuesday night. He currently works as the volunteer coordinator for the Greenwich Fire Department. He's been a volunteer firefighter in the town of Greenwich for many years, and he has first-hand knowledge of the number of false calls that the town fire department responds to. He's also familiar with the burden placed on the police department with their false alarms. He does feel that the homeowner should be instructed by the board on the proper placement of smoke detectors. The board voted the committee voted 12-0-0 in favor.
Thank you. Mr. Von Kaiserling, Chair of our Appointments Committee.
Mr. Delman's committee, as usual, covered all the salient factors. We interviewed Chief Kelly, on the 9th last Tuesday. We voted 10-0-0 in favor of them. He's had, as you heard, a long service in the volunteer effort and is now with the fire department, has been rather successful in developing the volunteer service, which is so critical. He also is a COSCOB boy, so I just wanted to put that in from District 8. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion on item 9. Item 11 now comes before us. John Crary, our Town Administrator.
Mr. Moderator, resolved that the Greenwich Police Department accept a monetary donation from the Greenwich Emergency Medical Services in the amount of $8,000. This donation will be used towards the purchase and installation of a boat crane to be used for rescues.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 11 has been moved and seconded. Dr. Delman with the report of our Town Services Committee.
Sergeant Brown of the Greenwich Police Department's Marine Division met with us last Tuesday. He explained this device will lift a victim up to 1,000 pounds out of the water and place them on the police boat. Currently, that task would have to be done by a large number of divers. Try lifting a rock over your head when you're swimming. The only question that was raised was that it's being donated by GEMS from their operating budget. And their operating budget is a line item in our May budget. I received an email today from Director Tufts of GEMS, who clarified that it is coming from their capital budget, which is a fundraising budget. It was voted in favor, 12-0-0.
Thank you. Discussion on item 11. Item 13 now comes before us. May we have the resolution on that item from the Board of Selectmen, I believe? Oh, Amina Ahmad. Good evening. Of the Law Department.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM. To consider and act upon the following substitute resolution, resolved to adopt an ordinance pursuant to Public Act 07-170 approved on June 29th, 2007, as it appears in the call of the RTM.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 13 has been moved and seconded. Doug Wells, Chair of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, we took this item up last Monday evening. Presenting this ordinance was Amina Ahmad of the Town Law Department. Last June, the RTM voted to refer this item back to the Legislative and Rules Committee to address some of our concerns and get a better understanding of how the ordinance would work. Between last June and now, this was addressed by a subcommittee from the Legislative and Rules Committee consisting of Kip Bergweger, Randall Huffman, and Donald Hamilton. Larry Simons and Ted Gortney of the BET also worked with the Law Department of the BET as well as the Law Department to revise this, actually in a very minor way from the ordinance that was submitted in June. The judicial and legislative history of this ordinance is that until 2003, it was the policy in Greenwich and indeed in most communities within the state to provide for tax abatement for those taxes that were assessed but not yet payable to a land trust taking title. However, in 2003, the Connecticut Supreme Court in the Interlude case said that practice was no longer lawful. In 2007, the state legislature, in order to undo the effects of the Interlude case, gave municipalities the right to pass an ordinance that would make tax abatement legal. This is what that ordinance does, or this ordinance does. To give you an idea of the relatively minor impact that this will have on our tax revenues, from the time of the Interlude case in 2003 until now, the revenues that we have collected over that 5-year period that would otherwise have been abated is slightly less than $34,000. There have been no conveyances of real or personal property to a land trust in either 2007 or 2008 to date, which would have been the cause for a tax abatement. We noted that the resolution as it appears in the call is defective because while it makes reference to the ordinance and indicates that it's attached to the call. In fact, it is not, and that was the purpose of this substitute resolution that was offered by Attorney Ahmad. The actual ordinance is now part of the call. We took 2 votes on the item, first as to legal order, 1200, and on the merits, 1200.
Thank you. Peter Berg, Vice Chair of our Land Use Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening, everyone. The Land Use Committee met last Monday evening at Town Hall, and Town Attorney Ahmad presented this item. As Mr. Wells explained, this item has been revised by the Legislative and Rules Committee. The goal of this ordinance is to allow the town to abate property taxes for lands that have been transferred to the land trust, which may in turn help the land trust receive more donations of open space land. Our vote was 12-0-0.
Thank you. Discussion on item 13. That now brings us to the last of the combined items, and I'll just remind any interested speakers on our separate items, if you would like to sign up for item 1, the Marchese appointment, or Hamilton Avenue, there are some sheets in the back of the room. All right, that now brings us to the final of the combined items, item number 11. Denise Savageau, our Director of Conservation.
Good evening. Item number 14, resolve that the Conservation Commission may accept and use a grant award of $5,000 from Audubon, Connecticut, and further resolve to amend the Conservation Commission's budget resolution as follows. Changes are underlined. That the Conservation Commission is authorized to accept grants and donations of monies and to collect monies from the sale of its publications, that all monies received may be added to the appropriate account upon appropriation by the Board of Estimate and Taxation and the representative town meeting, if necessary, under Section 30 of the Charter, to be used by the Commission to publish natural resource books, maps, reports, and pamphlets, to erect bird nest boxes, to manage nesting habitats of endangered and threatened species, and to undertake other appropriate habitat management pursuant to Connecticut General Statute, Section 7-31AB. Thank you.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 14 has been moved and seconded. Doug Wells with the report of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Denise Savageau came to our meeting last Monday night. This item is a request to accept a grant from Audubon, Connecticut, in the amount of $5,000 to be used in a vegetation study on Great Captain's Island and to build some facilities for the birds out there. We believe this item came to our committee because of the need to amend our budget resolutions for the Conservation Commission by adding the 2 words that are underlined in the existing budget resolution. There was very little discussion, no controversy. We took 2 votes as to legal order, 12-0-0, as to merits, 12-0-0.
Thank you. Mr. Berg with the report of the Land Use Committee.
Good evening again. Conservation Director Denise Savageau met with the Land Use Committee last Monday evening. There are 2 parts to this item. One is to accept a $5,000 grant from Audubon to survey the impact of invasive plants on the heron rookery at Great Captain's Island. And secondly, to revise our budget resolution to include grants. Our vote was 12-0-0.
Thank you. Discussion on item 14. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Combined items 3, 5, 6, 7, 9, 11, 13, and 14, and proceed to poll your delegation. We will continue with the first of the separate items, that being item number 1, which is the appointment of Paul Marchese to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a term expiring March 31, 2011. That item was postponed from our June meeting, so it is now currently before us. May we have the reports of our committees? Now, I just remind our committee chairs or reporting individuals to please anticipate where we are so we don't have to await the long walk forward. We're going to begin with Mr. Berg, Vice Chair of our Land Use Committee.
Good evening again. The Land Use Committee met last Monday evening at Town Hall. Mr. Marchese met with us to explain his reasons for wishing to continue to serve on the Planning and Zoning Commission and to answer questions. All 12 districts were present. Mr. Marchese is an internationally recognized architect. He helped write the regulation that eliminated free lot splits in Greenwich, which he told us were causing overdevelopment in our downtown neighborhoods. Mr. Marchese said that the town needs a new plan of conservation and development in order to enable the Planning and Zoning Commission to write new regulations that will address the concerns of many residents. He helped write the draft of the new plan of conservation and development. Mr. Marchese said planning and zoning needs more tools than FAR, our floor area ratio regulation, which does not limit bulk or impervious surfaces. He said he favors additional regulations that limit cubic feet and require step backs to reduce looming. He says planning and zoning needs the new plan of conservation and development to enable it to write such regulations. Mr. Marchese said he considers planning and zoning's highest priority is to enact regulations that limit impervious surfaces such as roofs and driveways, which he said are a major cause of flooding and pollution of our streams, rivers, and the Long Island Sound. Mr. Marchese said a town with 20% total impervious surface is unhealthy. At 25%, he said, the battle is lost. Some zones in Greenwich are approaching 100%. Mr. Marchese said Greenwich needs regulations which will limit impervious surface so that at total build-out, impervious surface in town is limited to 20%. In response to member questions, Mr. Marchese said he favors requiring a drainage report on every application. Mr. Marchese responded to numerous questions from committee members about projects that they said have changed the character of their neighborhoods. Mr. Marchese was asked about apparent disconnects between planning and zoning and the Department of Public Works. Mr. Marchese said the building inspector does not have enough staff. He said the draft plan of conservation and development calls for increased staffing in the building inspection department. Mr. Marchese responded to questions about a possible conflict of interest regarding a current project in town for which he is the architect. Mr. Marchese said he had recused himself regarding that project. He said he recused himself on 3 projects in his 5 years on the Planning and Zoning Commission. Despite his recusal, Mr. Marchese was asked why his current project seemed to stretch many rules. Several members of the committee, including Mr. Levine, a former chair of Planning and Zoning, and several members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, including its current chairman, Donald Heller, spoke on behalf of Mr. Marchese's character, dedication, and technical competence. The vote on Mr. Marchese was 8-2 and 2 abstentions. The member from District 2 voted no because he thinks the commission needs a different mix of members, including a neighborhood advocate, instead of its current mix, which he said is weighted to architects and other real estate professionals that see Greenwich from development and technical perspectives rather than from neighborhood perspectives. The member from District 12 voted no because of the appearance of a conflict of interest. He said the applicant appeared to have used his knowledge of zoning regulations to skirt those regulations. District 1 and 6 abstained because of the appearance of a conflict of interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Von Keyserling with the report of the Appointments Committee.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Moderator, you may recall that last June we were privileged to give you a report on Mr. Marchese, having interviewed him on April the 8th. This has been a long journey for Mr. Marchese. We voted 12-0-0 in his favor, if you recall, with high praise. We did the usual due diligence as we do with our reappointments. We asked particularly about areas of conflict of interest and specialities that they bring to the table. Mr. Marchese expressed that he did not do much work within town, that he's retired. He took a couple of projects from time to time. And he said that if he did have a conflict that was in conflict with his duties as on the commission, that he would, of course, recuse himself and absent himself from the process. As I say, not only did we vote for him in April with a high praise, extraordinarily high praise from the committee, when Tuesday, we came to our meeting Tuesday night and heard about the discussion that had gone on in land use reported by some of our members, and that Mr. Marchese had, at that point, stated that he was going to try to submit his resignation. My committee, Appointments Committee, was full of consternation about this. They were very troubled by it. We discussed several things that could be done in response to this, because we felt he was an extraordinarily valuable member of this commission and the town service. And as a result, we passed a sense of the committee meeting, all present and voting unanimously, which states, the Appointments Committee, should mention that this is the first time that I think any committee has ever passed such a resolution, and that's how extraordinarily the committee felt about it. The Appointments Committee was unanimous in its support for Mr. Marchese's renomination, that the committee valued his significant contributions to the P&Z over many years of public service, and that the committee has complete confidence in his ability and integrity to make further valuable contributions as a Commissioner of Planning and Zoning in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion on item 1. Joseph Pellegrino, Vice Chair of the Appointments Committee, to be followed by Janet Lockton of District 7.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, fellow members, and guests. I wish to speak this evening on behalf of Mr. Paul Marchese to be reappointed as Commissioner to the Planning and Zoning Commission. The Appointments Committee, as you heard the review, met this past April. The vote was unanimous. I'd like to offer my additional observations. In my 4 years of service on the Appointments Committee, I cannot recall an interview that generated as much uniform, enthusiastic support for a candidate as that from Mr. Marchese. The Appointments Committee questioned Mr. Marchese for well over an hour. We focused on the merits of his reappointment and on the appropriate criteria for judging the candidate. We engaged in the dialogue which solicited his views and philosophy towards land use. We probed as to what his specific contributions to the P&Z Commission have been to date and what he wished to accomplish going forward. We assessed what he brought to the table that was special to the Commission. We shared with him our frustrations with the changes taking place in our respective districts. In short, we engaged in a constructive, two-way dialogue that was informative, insightful, and helpful to all who took part. Overall, our discussion was broad as well as specific to the workings of the Commission and what we as a community and they as a Commission could do to address our concerns going forward, be that scale, density, runoff, aesthetics, etc. In every instance, Mr. Marchese was forthright and candid with his response. He shared with us his efforts to address the regulations regarding lot splits. He explained the need to develop consensus within the Commission for changes to take place and the need to be an expert and advocate for change on one topic at a time. He shared with us a number of creative ideas about developing potential regulations on cubic feet, impervious ground cover, reclining setbacks. With each question and topic, Mr. Marchese left us with the impression that he was sincere in his passion for maintaining the spirit of Greenwich each of us feels is special to our community. That he was a creative thinker and thought deeply about the technical and practical issues to land use regulation, and that above all, he was honest and direct in all of his dealings. As a committee, we believe his expertise as an architect is special and important to a well-balanced and effective P&Z Commission. We also believe he will make a difference in developing new regulations for the Commission going forward. And finally, we know that he will continue to serve without bias and seek creative solutions to difficult problems as they arise on a case-by-case basis. What I've now shared with you, albeit in abbreviated form, is the basis for our Appointments Committee overwhelming enthusiasm for the reappointment of Mr. Marchese. And it's important to note that absolutely nothing that has transpired over the past week has changed or altered our opinion. Finally, I wish to add that I've discussed with Mr. Marchese's, Mr. Marchese's reappointment with Harry Labine, a fellow member of District 11 and past chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Harry worked with Mr. Marchese during the 5 years Paul has been on the commission. Harry could not be here this evening in that he is attending a high school reunion in Indianapolis. He authorized me to say that he unreservedly supports the reappointment of Mr. Marchese to the commission. I now ask that each of you support the reappointment of Mr. Marchese, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Janet Lockton of District 7, to be followed by Joe Williams of District 7.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, members, friends. All or most of us in this room have been affected by drainage problems and the change in the residential character of our neighborhoods by overdevelopment of lots. Mega mansions casting shadows over nearby residents and flooding caused by destruction of pervious surfaces have pitted neighbor against neighbor. The nominee has designed a house at 14 Meadow Lane, the former George C. Scott property. The plan apparently does not comply with planning and zoning regulations for site plan review, did not follow permitting process for excessive stone walls, nor state statute. A public hearing held in June and one in July of 2008, one commission member admitted that a mistake had been made in overall site plan review, and it would not happen again with other proposals. And another commissioner said, that project is so far along, we can't do anything about it now. The project has set a precedent for single-family dwellings on one lot. The nominee designed a project with 3 residential dwellings on 3.5 piece of a 4-acre lot in a 2-acre zone. The neighbors have had to deal with 2 years of excessive noise, dust from rock drilling and cutting. The development created over 1 acre of impervious surfaces on a 3.5-acre lot. All this construction without required planning and zoning oversight. Complete review was required in both 2005 and in 2007. Site plan review was inexplicably delayed until June 2008 when the project was 75% complete. An appeal has been filed in the Superior Court at Stamford, suing the Planning and Zoning Commission and the owners. The complaint cites the Commission for acting illegally, arbitrarily, capriciously, in abuse of the discretion vested in the Commission regarding drainage and other aspects. The complaint lists the P&Z regulations that were abridged and state law. The interrelationship between the defendants and the nominee is indisputable. The Commission voted to approve an application which had not been vetted through proper and timely public hearing process. Repeated calls to clarify approval made to P&Z members remain unanswered today. Twists and turns in the plan created by the nominee are like circles within circles. The courts will resolve if this project went through the proper legal process or not. And the town is in another lawsuit. The Planning and Zoning Commission owes all of us an explanation on why regulations were not adhered to and why questions that were asked remain unanswered. I stand to oppose this nomination. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Joe Williams of District 7, to be followed by Don Heller, Chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Mr. Moderator, other members of the RTM and guests. My name is Joe Williams. I'm with District 7 of the RTM. I'm a resident of Greenwich for over 40 years and primarily in the real estate industry myself as a professional. I'm happy to say that over approximately 20 of those years, I have known the candidate, Paul Marchese, and worked with him professionally in New York. And one anecdote that I want to share with you relates a little bit of what Paul Marchese is all about. In 1993, one afternoon, I had lunch with him and some of his colleagues at the time that Paul was the chief architect for the World Trade Center and for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. I was a consultant to them. The next day, it was reported that terrorists had planted bombs in the lower levels of the Trade Center, torn it asunder, and I was obviously very concerned about this and tried to call Mr. Marchese and his colleagues and wasn't able to do that for obvious reasons. They were okay. But the point of it is that Paul had sequestered his team, himself and his team, in a hotel next to the World Trade Center, and for over 90 days he was not available for comment because they were basically working 24/7 as much as humanly possible to restore the ability of the World Trade Center to house its tenants. This they did in 90 days, much to the surprise of honestly the world, and accolades were given to him and his team, specifically internationally, for the technical and administrative and creative skills that they exhibited and dedication in this situation. Several years later, Paul did retire from the World Trade Center after 25 years of good service there and started a small practice up here. And since then, I've also worked with him and talked to him on numerous occasions about some of the issues that he has encountered through the Planning and Zoning Department. And I'll tell you that Mr. Marchese is one of the is a gem that we should value as someone who is serving with us and for us for the town and through the Planning and Zoning Commission. I would say that probably no one is more sensitive to the issues of overbuilding that he and his other members of the Planning and Zoning Department are dealing with and trying to change through modifications to the new PODC, and then ultimately by implanting these changes in the PODC into the zoning regulations. I would also say that probably no one is more capable of being sensitive to the technical issues that someone like Paul, who has the experience, the architectural experience, the community experience, to add creatively and positively to this process of the PODC. With regard to his responsibility and his concern for any issues of conflict, I would say that even as late as a week ago, I am also on the Land Use Committee, and when some of these issues were brought up, Paul voluntarily and explicitly excused himself and recused himself from the room during these discussions because that is what he is required to do. And no one would be more sensitive to that than Paul was then, and I think would be in any time in the future. Finally, I think it's important that we all recognize that the Planning and Zoning Commission is not just a group of technical people making zoning decisions until 2 o'clock in the morning, which happens all the time. It's rather a diverse group of people who are making not just technical decisions, but decisions with regard to development, with regard to density, with regard to what our town is all about in a business sense and a legal sense. And the diversity within that commission is very important. To have somebody like a Paul Marchese with his technical background and experience is essential. And with his sensitivity to what we all, at least certainly I feel is important to this town, is essential to the success of that commission. I fully endorse Mr. Marchese's renomination and election to that position on the P&Z.
Donald Heller, Chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission, to be followed by Joan Caldwell, Chair of District 10.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you tonight. I come before you to strongly endorse the reappointment of Paul Marchese, one of our outstanding commissioners, and a credit to P&Z and to the town. Now, there has been some discussion about a particular application to P&Z which came before us a while ago. With this as a backdrop, some questions have been raised about Paul's influence on a decision made by P&Z. A few of you have asked me to comment about this. We discussed the issues with the town attorney's office and have been advised in the strongest possible terms that it would be very inappropriate for the commission to explain and or argue its zoning as opposed to planning decisions before any other body in town. We must maintain standing as an independent commission. Imagine the effect on our decision-making process, ladies and gentlemen, if we were required to defend each decision for review, other than through the courts, of course. I can say, however, that the case in question was examined 3 times by the Wetlands Commission, once by the Board of Appeals, and once by P&Z. That's 5 times. In every single case, the decision was unanimous in favor of the applicant. And in every single case that was involved, Paul Marchese recused himself. Now, if I may, a word about P&Z operations to clear up confusions. Our operating orders are to make appropriate decisions, always according to the regulations. These regulations tell us what to do. We are required to base any and all decisions based on regulations. I can assure you that our interpretation of the regulations was at issue in this application. This provides, above all, a certainty to what a person can do with his property. All P&Z activities are transparently open, always during hearings, with allowances for suggestions, criticism, and comments from any interested party. The decisions are openly arrived at, including the discussings, voicing differences of opinion when we make our decisions. Now, the commission itself consists of working and retired or semi-retired people. It is critical to have both. Example, in my particular case, when my kids got out of school, I lost perspective on what goes on with the Board of Education. That's why I no longer consider myself relevant as far as education is concerned. That's why we need working people like Paul Marchese together with retired people, so you have balance. We need on-hand professionals in the industry, technically, professionally, and business-wise, to match up against those who are retired. Now, final comments as to Paul himself. He is part of our commitment demonstrated over a period of 5 years. For example, in the 07-08 fiscal years, P&Z held some 68 meetings, including work on the POCD, each of which averaged about 4 hours. The total comes to 272 hours in 12 months. And this does not include homework, to read documents, and to visit sites. About 1 full day per week is devoted to the service of this town. Now, the gentleman who spoke before you talked about Paul's qualifications. Let me tell you about one instance where he recused himself. It was a case where he bid on a contract, didn't get the contract, but recused himself when the issue came before us because he felt that even though he was not involved in business way, any decision he made would reflect the fact that he did not get the job for that particular case. That's a good single example of many of a person with the highest sense of morality. I urge you, ladies and gentlemen, to continue having Paul Marchese serve the town. And I thank you very much.
Thank you. Joan Caldwell of District 10.
Mr. Moderator, members of town meeting, I know the particular house that the delegate from District 8 is referring to, and I have to believe that the construction of that house, however long it took, had to be awful, because it's a big house and it didn't happen overnight. And I suspect that it was done at times without regard to the neighbors. However, in the interest of fairness and accuracy, which is the thing that you and I must be most concerned about, there are some things here that need to be set straight. The delegate from District 7 said that there were 3 houses on 3.5 acres. The property in question is in a 2-acre zone, and that would sort of imply, if not say outright, that the property is overburdened with structures that should never have been permitted and wouldn't have been had the property been reviewed or had a site plan review by planning and zoning. Now, that's not correct. The site is 14 acres, and the zone is 2. You do the arithmetic. There are more houses available on this property if somebody wants to build them. However, the 3 that are there are clustered, and they're clustered on what I am told is a 3.5 acre corner or portion of the lot, and there's a line drawn around them. The line is not a subdivision line. This property has never been subdivided. It is treated as one property, one owner, who is entitled to do with his property what he chooses, as long as he doesn't violate inland wetland regulations, does not exceed the 150,000 cubic yard requirement, which then does trigger a planning and zoning review, and meets the setbacks. In the case in question, the houses were up. The owner decided he wanted a pool house. He went back for permission to build it. The construction or possible construction of a pool house triggered the 150,000 cubic foot regulation, and it went to site plan. Now, all this owner has done, as far as you and I are concerned, is he's put 3 houses on what we call an oversized lot. And he's put them on, and if he ever chooses to sell his property, he has a couple of options. He can demolish a couple of the structures, he can take the kitchen out of them, or he can sell 2 acres with each of those structures, which would be legally conforming. So nothing happened here that was illegal. It was perfectly legal. And unfortunately, unpleasant to live next to. I don't believe the commission or this particular commission did anything that is wrong. And therefore, I can't turn my back on him. I have to say, he's a good addition to our commission, and I will so vote.
Thank you, Judge Caldwell. Further discussion on item 1. Mr. Von Keyserling.
As the sympathy that has been extended before to any joining neighbor, I join that sympathy. It's probably hell to go on with these building projects year after year. The thing that I want to direct your attention to is that what's happening in front of us now is basically the lady from District 7 is trying to retry the planning and zoning application in front of the RTM. The matter before us, quite properly, is a reappointment of Mr. Marchese. The question are his qualifications. In addressing this application, the best that can be said is a trial by association. If the application was bad and he was attached to the application, therefore he's bad. It's that kind of a logic. It doesn't hold. There is probably nobody in this room that has been as deeply involved in conflict of interest questions in the RTM and our appointments over the years as I have been. And I've spent over 15 years with the Board of Ethics trying to tighten up our system, which I think they've done a wonderful job at. When asked about the problem with recusal in the town of Greenwich is that if a person has so much private business and has to recuse himself so much, it may in fact make them less than a benefit operationally to the board which they belong. They have to be absent from it so much they become ineffective. We had a case, as we remember, just a year ago, I believe this time, on the inland wetlands where a person was recusing themselves 30% of the time. When asked about recusal of Mr. Marchese, in 5 years, his record, I believe, is either 2 or 3 at the most times that he's recused himself. And that was followed by an explanation of the chairman of P&Z saying that every member of the P&Z, in his appreciation, recuses themselves at least once a year. So this is hardly unusual, out of line, or of deep concern. As Ms. Caldwell has pointed out, the application itself is perfectly legal, but I will tell you that this. When the question of the inland wetlands gentleman came up a year ago, we did go to the Board of Ethics. The Board of Ethics had a considerable discussion about this situation. He was a professional working in town with projects that were before his board inland wetlands. And there's a sort of a similar rationale here, but far more intensive. The Board of Ethics gave a letter saying that they felt that his services were important enough that he should continue on it. They delineated the process very carefully of how to separate his public service from his private interest, what needed to be done in recusing, et cetera, et cetera. I can tell you that Mr. Marchese not only did everything that letter suggested that the Board of Ethics would require, but he went further. Not only did he recuse himself from the meetings of the P&Z, he absented himself from the briefing sessions and the work sessions and the publications that go with it. He also declined from discussing the application creation with the lawyer for the applicant. He was simply the architect that decided an arch goes here, a window goes there, not to minimize it, but that was his job. It was the lawyer's job, in this case Mr. Hagney, as we all know, a very able lawyer, to devise the strategy and plan of putting an application forward. He did not discuss that with his client or with the lawyer, so he had probably less knowledge about this application than the lady from District 7, oddly enough. So when we say about all the things you've heard about his integrity and his record and the support that he's seen tonight, which I hope he feels is heartening, one should understand the question before you is Mr. Marchese a valid and good appointment to the P&Z? Has his service been valuable, since we've already seen what he's been able to do with the POCD and other areas? And do we wish to return him, and is that merited? Thank you.
Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Item number 1, and proceed to poll your delegation. I have the results of the vote on the combined items. Those were items 3, 5, 6, 7, 9, 11, 13, and 14. Those in favor, 180. Opposed, 2. Abstaining, 0. The combined items have carried. Item 2 now comes before us. That also was postponed from our June meeting, so it is now currently before us. May we have the reports on that item, beginning with Peter Berg, Vice Chair of our Land Use Committee.
Thank you. Item 2 is the renomination of Frank Farraker to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a term expiring March 31, 2011. Mr. Farraker also came before the Land Use Committee last Monday evening. He is a lifelong resident of Greenwich. He is a developer. Mr. Farraker said he wants to preserve Greenwich. He said he knows how developers think and uses that knowledge to prevent overdevelopment. Mr. Farraker said he is passionate about preserving historic structures. He supports longer time periods before historic houses can be demolished. He says there needs to be a fund to help preserve historic structures in town. Mr. Farraker said, our number one problem is lack of enforcement. He said Greenwich needs more building inspectors. He agreed that the town needs to clarify the reporting relationship of zoning enforcement officers. Mr. Farraker says the Department of Public Works, not Planning and Zoning, needs to initiate new regulations to control flooding in town. He also said, related to this, that our fill ordinance is 50 years old. Regarding flooding and impervious surfaces, Mr. Farraker said he supports a new regulation that will require an application to planning and zoning for any change that increases impervious surfaces on a property by 200 square feet or more. Harry Levine, a member of the Land Use Committee and a former chair of Planning and Zoning, vouched for Mr. Farraker's professionalism. The vote on Mr. Farraker was 11-1. District 2 voted no because, as with Mr. Marchese, he thinks the commission needs a different mix of members, including a neighborhood advocate. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Von Keyserling with the report of our Appointments Committee.
Oh, hello again. Ladies and gentlemen, we met with Mr. Farraker on April 8th, almost 6 months ago. And we had a long discussion with Mr. Farraker as well as Mr. Marchese that same night on these issues. The vote from the Appointments Committee, as I reported to you last June, was, I believe, 11-01. I don't believe was 11-01. One abstention, District 2. There was a considerable discussion after the vote. I don't know how to put this, that the committee felt that, excuse me. Sorry. The committee felt that Mr. Farraker did not display to them a sufficient energy, enthusiasm, or focus on the residential development in the area. He was talking about downtown Greenwich a lot and the downtown development. And that disturbed, after the fact, the committee members to a considerable extent. Although they did vote for him, it was kind of with a comment. I can say that since that meeting in April, in the discussion after that, I learned perhaps what the rationale behind that was. The Planning and Zoning Commission, in its effort to make the plan of conservation development, assigned to each one of its members a certain area of responsibility in putting it together. Mr. Marchese's and I committee came off with glowing situation on residential development and the controls on it. It happened to be that was Mr. Marchese's area that was assigned by the P&Z to look into and develop concepts. Mr. Farraker was given the assignment to look on the downtown, so I would assume at that meeting in April, he was probably talking a lot about downtown because that was the issue that he was most deeply involved in at that time and in front of his mind. So I would give that kind of I don't know if that's an explanation, but further information to bear with it. But it was 11-01. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion on item 2. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 2, and proceed to poll your delegation. Item number 4 now comes before us. Frank Mazza, Chairman of the Hamilton Avenue School Building Committee.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, this is a substitute resolution for item number 4. Resolved that the sum of $700,000 be and the same is hereby appropriated to be added to a capital account number Z 68017925955025110 known as Hamilton Avenue School Reconstruction. Said appropriation to come from the capital and non-recurring fund.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 4 has been moved and seconded. Bob Brady, Chairman of our Education Committee.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, members, and guests. Education Committee met to consider this item last Monday night. All districts were represented. The Hamilton Avenue School Building Committee was represented by its chairman, Mr. Mazza, and Tom Hegney, a member. John Crary attended, representing the First Selectman and the Public Works Commissioner.
Yes, Mr. Porter, please state your point of order.
I think it's incumbent upon the membership to give courtesy to the speaker to reduce the din or lull or whatever it is that I hear.
Mr. Porter has rightfully indicated that when someone is speaking, we should give the speaker our attention. Thank you, Mr. Porter. Mr.
Well, I'll speak more loudly. I'll keep this back a ways. Where was I? Mr. Crary attended representing the First Selectman and the Public Works Commissioner. John Wayne Fox had provided a statement relating to the effect on the town's claims position of this appropriation, quote, "An appropriation by the RTM for the Hamilton Avenue School Building Committee will not be an acknowledgement of legal liability," close quote. There were 4 principal questions asked. First was, given what we were told in June that the then $200,000 interim appropriation was more than adequate to complete the work, why are we being asked for $700,000 more? Second, when will the kids begin to be able to use Hamilton Avenue School? Third, what's the town learned, especially which is that which is applicable to Glenville and the high school project? And how much is likely to be recovered in post-completion claims negotiations? On the first point, Mr. Mazza provided the attached report dated September 8th. It was included in the explanos, showing the appropriations to the project to date, which $30,205,000. This $700,000 would take that up to nearly $31 million. Project cost to date, which is $30.2 million. And the project's uncommitted funds of about $30,000. And the major categories for which money is being requested. The $700,000 is combined of 7 components, each of which is summarized in the memo. Subsequent to our June meeting, the contractor identified many additional work items which it, the contractor, deemed were out of contract, requiring a change order in order to get the work done at additional cost. These items are included in the first item, $287,000. As noted in the memo, the building committee does not agree that all of these change orders are proper and will be part of some final settlement negotiation. Second, the contractor and the architect disagree on the work that has to be done on the chimneys, and the contractor refused to do the work for a variety of reasons. The building committee is having the work done outside. A portion of that work was included in the contract with the contractor who refused to do the work. That amount will be charged back against the prime contractor. Contractor and the architect disagree on how to insulate the attic in the preserved part of the building. There was loose insulation up there. It had to be removed as part of the ductwork. The planning for the project by the architect apparently didn't contemplate that. The insulation had to be removed and is being replaced by additional or new insulation after the equipment to be installed in the attic was up and running. The architect's initial design overlooked the need to remove and replace that. That's a $36,000 item estimate. The heat pump system, which supports the air conditioning system, was delivered without valves, automatic valves, which prevent freezing of the pumps in the event of certain weather conditions. Without these valves, a freeze-up requires a manual reset by the building maintenance people. The building committee feels that those should be added, and that's a $49,000 item. The project manager and the architect are needed while the work continues to completion. It's now some, I got my arithmetic right, I think 16 months overdue, something in that order. That was $738,000. There's another $30,000 in here for that. Those are the professional costs, and they basically are tied to the delays. Additional proposed change orders that are being presented by the contractor and also are part of work required by the town building inspectors amount to $125,000. As part of this, I invited the Public Works Commissioner to the meeting because this involves situations where the town Building Department approved plans presented by the architect. The contractor built the building in accordance with the approved plans. Building inspectors approved the installation of various switches and other components in the rough condition while the walls were still open, and you can move things around easily if they're not properly positioned. And then on final inspection, after the walls were all closed up, said, oh, these things are placed too high, they've got to be lowered. And we will be having a discussion, I know, as part of the high school project with the Public Works Department so that we do not encounter this situation in the future. There are 3 projects going on as between Nathaniel Witherell, the high school, and Glenville, and actually 4, the public safety project. And we do want to make sure we're not going to encounter more of this. And then there's $123,000, which is true contingency. It's for items they simply don't know about. It's the unknown unknowns between now and whenever this project is finished. Second question had to do with when the building will be available. The building committee did not say. They didn't answer at this time. Dr. Sternberg said that the Board of Education needs 4 weeks, 28 days, from the time at which they receive a clean building, and the contractor's finished with it, cleaned it, to run the environmental test to be sure that it is in fact clean, so that that needs to happen. The 2 major open items at August 15th, when the BET initially considered the $500,000 request, were for HVAC system, delivery of air to classrooms, and the emergency lighting. As of a week ago, when we met on this, those items were still open. The building committee had received a report on the HVAC from the contractor. However, it was not certified by the engineer, as it has to be, and therefore was not meaningful in the sense other than they said, well, we did the tests. One of the problems is that the airflow in some rooms, it was inadequate according to the standards that had been set up. They did achieve the necessary airflow in some cases by removing noise baffles from the ductwork, but that increased the noise level. We commented upon this to the building committee and to others at our meeting, reminding them that one of the reasons that all of our school buildings have been challenged over the years, and we've done work in them, is a combination of poor air circulation and too much noise. We certainly do not want to get the air circulation at the cost of a higher noise level. And again, there are differences in standards between the contractors and the Board of Educations. Unsurprisingly, the Board of Educations are higher than the contractors in terms of noise. Where are we now? The committee members did encourage the building committee to document and convey its lessons learned to the other building committees. Mr. Mazza said this is taking place. Again, as a member of the high school building committee, I definitely want to see that happen. We also had representatives of the Hamilton Avenue School and Glenville PTAs, the PTA Council, and the Board of Education Chairman Nancy Weisler. They all urged us to approve this item, recommend approval. The committee voted 10 in favor, 1 opposed, 1 abstention to recommend adoption of this resolution. District 1 voted no because of our responsibilities to our taxpayers, and District 2 abstained. Thank you.
All right. Before continuing with the next committee report, I'm going to report the vote on items 1 and 2. Item 1 is the appointment of Paul Marchese to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Those in favor, 148. Opposed, 15. Abstaining, 15. That item has carried. Item 2 is the appointment of Frank Farraker to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Those in favor, 146. opposed 19, abstaining 9. That item has carried. Continuing with the reports on item 4, the Hamilton Avenue project, Pamela Frederick, Chair of our Finance Committee.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Moderator, members, and guests. This item was presented to the Finance Committee by Frank Mazza, the Building Committee Chair. Again, we have before us a request for additional appropriation with little change in the way of explanation since we approved the $200,000 in June. This has been a difficult project for all involved. The urgent need to complete this construction has led to the previous approvals, those received to date, and the recommendations you'll receive this evening. Ultimately, the primary reasons this project has been fraught with delays and overruns seems to be threefold. The town's decision to use a general contractor, in this case, Worth Construction, who completely controls the project. Poor staffing of this project by Worth, who are now working on their 4th project manager and their 2nd supervisor. And third, a contentious relationship between the architect and Worth. As noted in June, the original project contingency was far too low, set at 3% compared to the 10 to 15% that is more typical for a construction project of this scale. If this appropriation is approved, the total project will be $30,905,000, including a total contingency from additional appropriation of $1,995,000 plus the $800,000 that was in the original appropriation for contingency. Therefore, of the original $28,110,000 construction cost, the total contingency represents 9.94%, which is less than the 10 to 15% that is typical. Where are we? We had an excellent report from Education, so I won't run through those items. But as we all know, the Building Committee has not obtained the temporary CO, and therefore have not handed over this project to the Board of Ed, which was originally targeted for August 27th. While no additional changes were anticipated at the time of the June appropriation, it is clear that there were a substantial number of changes being disputed, and Worth used from I guess maybe my perspective, this urgency to force a memorandum of understanding with the town. Their written agreement, which this current appropriation addresses, includes a statement that it in fact is not binding, nor should it be, given that the town appears to have been somewhat, to have been entered into this agreement somewhat under duress. Again, this funding is sought to reach completion, including the retention of contractor and the architect, as well as payments for overruns and an additional $200,000 to cover known additional changes, as well as a contingency for other items that may arise, such as the punch list, as we reach completion. While again, the Building Committee feels that the appropriation includes all known cost, it is the unknown and undisclosed cost claimed by the contractor that continues to haunt and escalate the cost of this project. This is a critical path item, and though there are no parties happy with the way the project has proceeded, the Finance Committee voted in favor of the item to ensure all of the school plans can proceed as scheduled without undue additional delay, including the Building Committee relinquishing Hamilton Avenue to the Board of Ed so that Glenville can then vacate and begin its construction and get closer to schedule. The vote, reluctantly I think, was 12-0-0 in favor. Thanks.
Thank you. Discussion on item 4. Julie Feriniars of the PTA Council, to be followed by Michael Bodson, Board of Ed.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen of the RTM. My name is Julie Freniars, and I am the president of PTA Council. Standing up up here with me are PTA presidents and PTA Council Executive Board members. Initially, I had asked only the PTA presidents from Hamilton Avenue, Glenville, Western Middle School, Cos Cob, North Street, Julian Curtis, and Parkway to join me because it is these 7 schools that are directly impacted by the unfinished Hamilton Avenue school building. But the other schools in the district spoke up and said they would like to stand here too because we are all united on this issue. The impact of Hamilton Avenue School not being completed is affecting all of the schools in the Greenwich Public Schools. With Glenville students dispersed throughout the community, it has resulted in art on the cart, limited music lessons, crowded PE classes, and other strains on delivering the Greenwich Public School curriculum as designed. We recognize this project has been an extreme challenge, both politically and financially, to the town of Greenwich, and fully expect a full review of the project once it has been completed. Tonight, though, it is our request that you vote to appropriate all of the money needed to complete Hamilton Avenue School. A delay in this funding would ultimately result in further costs for the community and put an undue burden on the school district. It would also be unfair to leave out the immense strain this is putting on the parents and teachers in both the Hamilton Avenue and Glenville school communities. PTA Council believes it is time for our educators to return to spending all of their time enhancing the Greenwich Public School curriculum and developing our district's leadership so each of our schools can provide a top quality education to our children. We thank you in advance for your support of this funding.
Thank you. Michael Bodson of the Board of Education, to be followed by Rose Ferrano.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM. My name is Mike Bodson. I'm a member of the Board of Ed, and I also sit on the Hamilton Avenue School Building Committee as the BOE representative. I'm commonly called, oh, you poor dumb son of a... Anyway. It is difficult, again, to return to the RTM to ask for additional funds to complete this project. As you have heard, we're asking for a significant amount, $700,000, in order to finish all the required work to get the building open. We wish to see the project completed as soon as possible, a project that already is significantly behind schedule. But we're also ensuring that the funds will be used appropriately to meet the requirements of the building department and other such needed expenditures. As you have heard, the requests for the funds come primarily from the result of the extensive and appropriate inspection process by the building department of the town of Greenwich, as well as other groups such as the fire department, P&Z, and health department. While we urgently wish to see this building complete, we're not cutting corners or in any way trying to minimize the importance of ensuring we have a safe, properly constructed building. It's hard to explain how we've gotten here. Going back through the files last week, I found memos describing the steps we needed to take to get the building open within 6 weeks. I was very optimistic, and unfortunately, it was dated May 2007. I have similar memos for October, December, March, May, and now current. Frustrating does not describe the feelings of everybody on the building committee. I did, however, visit the school on Saturday, and it is beautiful and it is incredibly near to being complete. The classrooms already have furniture in them, and they look like they're set to go. But unfortunately, as you have heard, we have repairs to be made that are required to obtain both the temporary certificate of occupancy and the final certificate of occupancy. I think Mr. Brady laid out all the various steps that had to be taken to get there. So the proper question which still needs to be answered is how we have gotten here and who is responsible. It's incredibly frustrating to see this happening, both in terms of the time delay, which impacts the children, and the cost overruns, which impacts the taxpayers of this town. There's no simple answer, and unfortunately we have to wait, however, until the project is over to get the true answers. Until then, the focus must be on getting this done, getting the children in, making sure the funds are spent properly and wisely. It's time to get this project completed and stop it from causing more tension and strain throughout the community. As you've heard, the request has been reviewed and approved by the BET and the various appropriate RTM committees. I also know that the Office of the First Selectman supports this request, and as such, I ask that the RTM also move forward to approve the funding and enable us to complete the new Hamilton Avenue School and finally let the children of Ham Ave get the school they deserve. Thank you.
Rose Ferrano, to be followed by Alex Capozza.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator and members of the RTM. I am Rose Ferrano, PTA co-president of Hamilton Avenue School. I am here on behalf of the Hamilton Avenue School community to request that you approve the $700,000 appropriation for completion of the Hamilton Avenue School. Our community seeks closure. This has been a very long and frustrating journey, but our understanding is that the project is very near to its end. We need your support to fund this project to its completion. We need your support to fund this project so that our children can move into a state-of-the-art building and get back to the process of learning. We need your support to fund this project so that our children can leave the modular building, our 4 pre-K classrooms are back united with us, and have access to an equitable, high-quality education like the other students in Greenwich have. Like you, we see many things that could have been done differently or managed differently to complete the project on time and on budget. As taxpayers, we see the waste that has occurred, and as contractors and the building committee have miscommunicated and misstepped. Nonetheless, we are here now, still in need of a complete building for our children, teachers, and administration to move into, so that the process of educating our elementary school students can be achieved. Our Hamilton Avenue School children are watching, waiting, and depending on all of you to support them in getting them to the school of their dreams. The Hamilton Avenue School community pleads for your vote in approving the requested appropriation of $700,000. We shall never forget your respect and attention to our dire situation. Thank you.
Alex Capozza to be followed by Robert McIntyre.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM. This evening I speak to you not only as a PTA member, as a parent and a taxpayer. We're frustrated with the cost of Hamilton Avenue's project. Trust me when I tell you, no one else has felt it more than the Haas community and our children and our incredible teachers and staff. This unattainable situation must come to an end. It has cost this community and our children plenty. There's no money in the world that will be able to replace what our families and, more importantly, our children have gone through. There's no turning back the clocks for them. There's no way to recover what they have lost. It is time to close the gap and finalize the Haas project. It is time for all of the parties involved to finalize and finally focus on the successful completion of this project and to approach it with the urgency it deserves. At this point, I do not care who's at fault. I'm sure we will deal with that matter later, along with the town. At this point, our Hamilton community would like for this to be finished, but finished correctly, so that 2 years from now, we do not find ourselves in front of the RTM asking for money to make sure Hamilton Avenue is a state-of-the-art school it should have been 2 years ago. I know what you're feeling, but at this point, any money requested must be allocated so this job can be completed. I ask all the parties involved to make this project the #1 priority. Our motto of Hamilton Avenue is that at Hamilton Avenue, we do what it takes. This is our motto for academic and other achievements. I never thought this motto would become a community cry for help. We're all part of Greenwich, regardless of our location. There are now not one, but 2 communities suffering because of this matter. As a parent, a PTA member, and a taxpayer, I'm asking you, please, do whatever it takes to finalize this nightmare and have our children in a safe educational environment so they can start a well-deserved educational life. They are our future, and anyone who thinks that this is not affecting them is not facing reality. I know you all have a full plate, but look at the bigger picture, our children and their future, and help this community get back to normal, get our lives as we knew them, and get our children into the beautiful new school. Thank you so much.
Robert McIntyre to be followed by Adam Savitz, District 11.
Mr. Moderator, honorable members of the Board of Selectmen, members of the BET, RTM, ladies and gentlemen. The hour is late and the temperature is hot. I'll try to keep my comments as brief as possible. My name is Bob McIntyre. I'm a Hamilton Avenue school parent and a member of the HamAv PTA. Tonight, we as members of the Hamilton Avenue school family and as members of the greater Chickahominy and surrounding communities come before you again to ask that you vote in favor of what now seems to be never-ending requests for funds so that our new school can be completed, not only sometime before our sons and daughters are ready to graduate high school, but also hopefully within our lifetime. I may and would also once again like to extend my personal thanks and appreciation for the involvement and concern of our first selectman, Peter Tessie. One can only wonder who came before him, those who came before him had showed as much interest, concern, and personal involvement, we may not even need to be here tonight. I ask that when voting tonight, each of you consider the following: that we as HAMAV parents, our children, our amazingly resilient and dedicated faculty and staff and community at large have been held hostage over the last 3+ years and have had to endure the unacceptable and intolerable circumstances and conditions that we still find ourselves in tonight. It was and is not our fault that the original Hamilton Avenue School was not properly maintained and that warnings by various individuals within the community regarding potential health risks went unheeded and was too late, until it was, too late. It is not our fault that there was poor and faulty work done during the construction of what were supposed to be temporary modular buildings, which were forced closed due to identical health risks found in the original building. It is not our fault that the abilities of the current general contractor and others involved and charged with the oversight and completion of this project is questionable at best. And even though after listening to comments made after the last special meeting of the BET, there seems to be plenty of blame to go around and to be shared by all parties involved in this project, it is not our fault that no one is willing to stand up and take responsibility for what has turned out not only to be an embarrassment for the community, but for our town as a whole. It is not our fault that this same contractor can complete 2 other major projects in town at or ahead of schedule and at or below budget, but when it comes to a school, runs 2 years over schedule and some $6 to $7 million over budget. Frankly, that's one beyond any comprehension. It is not our fault, and we should not be punished for something that we as a community have no control over. We recognize that these are economically difficult times and heed the First Selectman's call for financial restraint. And believe me, we as parents and community representatives don't want to be here asking you for yet more money any more than you want us here. But we have no choice. I repeat, no choice. I will admit to you that I was astonished that there was actually a no vote cast at the recent meeting of the RTM's Education Committee meeting a few days ago. While it is not my intent to make insult or cause offense to anyone here tonight, it is this parent's opinion that a negative vote only demonstrates a complete lack of understanding of the current circumstances and certainly no compassion for the situation and those stuck in the middle of it all. In closing,
yes, Dr. Carlson, please state your point. Could you rise, please, and state your point of order? Mr. McIntyre, I understand the frustration you have felt.
With apologies, Mr. Moderator.
I think, if we're reading the body right, it may not be necessary to lay out all the...
My apologies for any offense caused to any individual in this room tonight. In closing, I ask that you all do what is morally, politically, and simply the right thing to do, and vote in favor of the additional funding. Please accept my thanks for the opportunity to address you tonight.
Mr. Savitz, to be followed by Randall Huffman.
Good evening. I promise to be brief. I want to support the substitute resolution to fund the Hamilton Avenue building project for the sake of the children. However, I think it is imperative that the RTM, as the ultimate authorizing body, find ways to not let this happen again. I call for the town, the BET, the Board of Education, the RTM, to perform a financial and administrative autopsy on this process, that the RTM use this information to modify the way administration of projects be done and potentially modify the existing building committees to prevent similar failures to happen again.
I think we can be sure that's going to be done. Randall Huffman, District 7.
Good evening. I know I and a number of other members of the RTM have struggled with this particular item and all those that preceded it for several years going back now. I created a few statements to read to you tonight, or at least to try to say to you tonight, but most every point that I was going to make have already been made by those who've come before in defense of the project. The problem we have is that everything we've tried to do for this project, including repeated funding over a period that goes back several years now, have not resulted in what we all sought, and that is to get the children into a new safe school at Hamilton Avenue and to allow the other needs of the Board of Education to proceed. I've been asked today by several, well, what would you do as an alternative? And the only thing that I can come up with without us trying to actually set out the kind of plan that should have been made some time ago is to insist that as a part of this funding that we get an absolute commitment from the building committee and the town's departments that they will take all necessary steps immediately to get this project finished, because we don't want to be here in December having this same discussion. Indeed, psychologists tell us that one definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. I think it's time to free ourselves from this collective psychosis. We will expect a different review in the future, a review of this project in the future, and a different result with future projects. But I think we need to say that in all regards, this is intolerable and this is more than enough. And I'm sorry to have seen this entire sad history. Thank you.
Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 4, and proceed to poll your delegation. Item number 8 now comes before us. Who will present item number 8? Maureen Cast? No? All right, I tried.
Very close. My name is Ellen Flanagan. I'm the Director of Human Resources for the Greenwich Public Schools. Before I read the resolution, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank Mr. Steve Anderson, Board of Education member and chair of the LIUNA Negotiations Committee, for his efforts to resolve this contract. Resolved that in accordance with Section 474 of the General Statutes, which requires the approval of any contract provision which modifies the municipal charter provision, the representative town meeting approves the provision of the collective bargaining agreement between the Greenwich Board of Education and LIUNA Local 136 for instructional aides, which changes the years of service for vesting in the Greenwich retirement system from 10 years to 5 years. Sense of the meeting resolution, whereas Connecticut statutes confer upon the Board of Education the exclusive authority to approve a collective bargaining agreement with the Public Service Employees Local 136 of Labor's International Union of North America, AFL-CIO, LIUNA Board of Ed, and whereas in order to provide the RTM with the opportunity to both comment upon the tentative agreement for the period covering July 1st, 2007 through July 30th, 2010, and to express its approval or disapproval prior to the board's acting on the agreement, the board proposes the following RTM sense of the meeting resolution. Now, therefore, be it resolved that it is the sense of the meeting, sense of the representative town meeting of the town of Greenwich that it supports the board's tentative collective bargaining agreement with the LIUNA Board of Ed.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the substitute resolution? The substitute resolution on item 8 has been moved and seconded. May we have the reports? We'll consider, although there are 2 parts to this, we'll consider them together as number 8. Bob Brady with the report of the Education Committee.
Good evening again. Again, all districts are represented. We met on this last Monday night. Mr. Anderson, Ms. Flanagan, Natalie Queen from the Board of Ed, Dr. Sternberg, Wallerstein were also present. Joan Caldwell, Labor Contracts Committee Chairman, also was present. We consider the two pieces separately, although it is a bit of a kludge to combine the sense of the meeting resolution with the substantive one, but what the hey. The substitute language was presented by the Law Department. Al Cava explained this agreement changes the defined benefit plan vesting period to 5 years from 10 years, and therefore the contract making this change required RTM approval. The estimated annual cost of this change is about $11,000. The committee voted 12-0-0 to recommend approval of the first part, which is the piece about waiving provisions of the charter. The second piece is the sense of the meeting resolution, wherein the Board of Ed is essentially asking the RTM for its advice and recommendations with respect to the overall contract. While we have no authority over the contract per se, and it's solely within the purview of the Board of Education, before acting upon it, they wanted us to make our recommendation to them. And so this is what the second piece, the sense of the meeting piece, does. It is our expression of approval or disapproval, as the case may be, of the agreement. Mr. Anderson summarized the key contract points. It covers about 188 people, covers a 3-year period from July last year, 2007, through 2010. The average annual gross wage increase is 3.19%, and including steps, 4.63%. Health insurance contributions increased from 7 to 11%. As a one-time $500 payment in October of 2008. Other changes include changes in handling of disciplinary letters, from destroying them after 18 months to maintaining them a permanent part of the employee's file. Hours for security guards have been changed, and the board has more flexibility with those. Specialist stipends were added for aides having special needs, qualifications, and skills. Pay rates place this group among the top third of similar positions in competing communities. Committee voted 12-0-0 to recommend approval of the sense of the meeting resolution. Well, the last part about consent agenda, I guess, doesn't apply. Thank you.
Thank you. Pamela Frederick with the report of our Finance Committee.
Okay, Ms. Moderator, members, and guests, I'll try to not repeat items covered by Bob as well. Let's see, I'm just going to switch over. I just wanted to note that the annual cost of contract increase was 3.19 as stated. This reflects an annual salary increase of 3%, 3.5%, and 4% respectively between the years of 2007 and 2010. With steps, the total increase is 4.63%. These reflect cost increases of over 5% in the first 2 years, but favorably a trend down to an increase of 3.74% in the 2009-2010 budget year due to savings from certain contract benefits. The board indicated that they believe that there was improvements in this group of employees with turnover decreasing from 18%, decreasing to 18% from as much as 30%. Key changes included a reduction in 6 days from 15 days to 13 days. This was given to the high usage by this employee group of those sick days of 14.6 days compared to teachers who only use 4.5 days. Of the one-time payment made to employees of $500, this was done to offset higher health care contributions. Without this payment, the second year cost increase would have fallen from the 5.07% to 2.95%, which is a great shift. And the average annual increase with steps would have been 3.93% instead of the 4.63%. The third key change was savings due to greater sharing of the healthcare premiums, more in line with other employees, and though these are lower than competitive positions, this is offset by the Lyona employees receiving somewhat lower relative pay. Improvement in hours were made to reflect full school year plus 2 days rather than a fixed number of days of 184. And as noted, an ability of the security personnel to work through 10 p.m. without a shift differential. Also, the employees benefited from receiving a formalized 15-minute break. Let's see. The agreement on the pensions was to have this unit adhere to the resolution of the teachers' arbitration on the move to defined contributions as has been done by other town collective bargaining units. Joan Caldwell will give the labor contracts. I was going to report that. It's important to note that a key tool for containing the town's overall budget is in containing these contract costs and other personnel costs, given that labor represents 75 to 80% of the budget. Given the improvements, the committee was supportive of this contract. We voted 12-0-0 in favor for both the contract and the vesting component as presented in the call. Thank you.
Thank you. Before continuing with our next report, I have the vote on item 4, which is the $700,000 appropriation for Hamilton Avenue. Those in favor, 137, opposed 20, abstaining 15. That item is carried. Joan Caldwell, Chairman of our Labor Contracts Committee.
Mr. Moderator, members of town meeting, the Labor Contracts Committee took up this item and voted in favor to recommend that you approve it. The content of the contract has been very well explained by the Chairman of the Finance Committee and of the Education Committee. I'm not going to repeat it. I would like to call your attention just to 2 or 3 things that have been mentioned by those 2 speakers. The cost of this contract without steps, it's just the straight general wage increase plus savings on insurance and the 2 sick days that we take back or that we don't have to pay for, is 3.19%. If you factor in the steps, the automatic increases that most employees in the town get, that changes and goes to 4.63. You will note that the general wage increase was reported as 3% for the year that's passed, 3.5% for the year we're in, and 4% for the year that's out. The 4% for the last year of the contract is the only, let me emphasize, only 4% we have granted to any group of employees. The committee is very much conscious of this and brings it to your attention, and we'll be discussing it and watching it as we go along. 4% in a GWI is going to be very difficult to live with if you're trying to hold your budget to 3.5 up to 4%. It just doesn't work. So we have to be very conscious of the wage increases we give in this respect. The other thing is that, again, the Board of Education and Mr. Cava have worked to get the defined contribution into this group, with this group of employees, and it was decided that this group would abide by the arbitration decision that the larger Lyona group is expected to receive. The town is expected to receive it within the next 2 or 3 weeks, but then I've been saying that since June, so who knows. The last thing is that the sick leave, we took back 2 days. It was clear when we realized, or when the board realized, that the instructional aides and guards were using 14.5 of 15 days, something was a little wrong. And so they have constricted that in the hopes that there will be less abuse and that 13 days will prove to be more than is really needed. As I say, our vote was 4 in favor, none opposed.
Thank you. Discussion on item 8. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 8, and proceed to poll your delegation. Item number 10 now comes before us. Joe Siciliano, Director, Parks and Recreation. Thank you for bearing with us.
Thank you. Mr. Moderator, members of the town meeting, I know that there's going to be a discussion with legislative rules. Item 10 is as it appears on the call.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 10 has been moved and seconded. Doug Wells, Chair of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, the committee took this item up on September 8th. Speaking on behalf of the ordinance was Bruce Spayman, Tree Warden for the town of Greenwich. This is an extensive revision of the previous ordinance, which dealt only with trees and shrubs along the town's public roads. This amended ordinance will also include trees, shrubs, and vegetation growing on all town-owned property. Mr. Spayman pointed out that there are 265 miles of public roads in our town, which creates 450 acres of linear forest that borders our roadways. Our committee found many problems with the definitions and the language in the ordinance. While no committee member voiced any opposition to what the ordinance is trying to accomplish, we all felt that the ordinance would benefit from better drafting. We were particularly concerned with Section 13.7, which lays out a new policy and standard for the Parks and Trees Division to adhere to when looking at trees that could create hazardous decisions. We discussed this with Attorney Fox, who was at our meeting, and he agreed that the way that this is drafted could create a situation where the town could be found liable for not following the mandates within the manual that is discussed in the ordinance. We are also concerned that the penalty provisions were deleted from the ordinance. When Mr. Spayman was asked why they were deleted, he explained it was the intention to use the penalties provided in our state statutes. However, many of our committee members felt uncomfortable not having the penalties spelled out within the body of the ordinance. The committee believes that this ordinance would benefit having our committee members work with the law department and Mr. Spayman to iron out these problems. We voted our committee to refer this item back to the Legislative and Rules Committee, and at the appropriate time I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Karen Sadekhan with the report of our Parks and Recreation Committee.
Good evening again. Bruce Spayman was with us to present the proposed amended ordinance, Trees and Vegetation. We were told that Legislative and Rules would move to postpone the item until October to work on some of the language, while they did not differ with the proposal itself. We spent some time reviewing the amendments. Bruce reminded us that the ordinance had been in place as is since it was originally written in 1948. The mission of the ordinance is to manage urban and community forestry. Mr. Spayman has been our tree warden for 6 years, of which 2 years has been spent working on this ordinance and these changes. He has been party to making similar tree ordinance in other municipalities in Connecticut. The Board of Parks and Rec, Conservation Commission, Greenwich Tree Conservancy, and various garden clubs have endorsed the amended ordinance. Mr. Spayman's goal is to complete a tree inventory of trees on town property by computer so that he knows what there is to manage, to work with the Conservation Commission to have long-term goals, and to codify the current work for future preservation and future mandates. The committee did have many questions regarding penalties for cutting down trees, which Mr. Wells just mentioned. And how does the town work with trees on state property when residents have questions? How are plants impacted if within the bounds, but not how are plants impacted? This was a discussion, one of the members, the definition of plants was an overlap. Vines were not considered part of the vegetation. So this was emphasized that this was for trees and shrubs, not vines and plants. Knowing that this was going to return to us, we did not take a vote. We will review it again when it comes before us, but I think briefly, unless there's some drastic changes from Legislative and Rules.
Thank you. Peter Berg with the report of the Land Use Committee.
Hello again. The Land Use Committee did take this item up at its meeting last Monday. The only thing I have to add is that Mr. Spayman was asked why there isn't more reference to trees in the draft plan of conservation and development that you've all received. And Mr. Spademan responded that he is working to include more tree issues in the new plan of conservation and development. We did not take a vote because we were told that this was coming back.
Thank you. Mr. Wells.
Mr. Moderator, our committee moved by a vote of 12-0-0 that this matter be referred back to our committee for further drafting.
Thank you. That being offered on behalf of one of our committees, it does not require a second. Discussion on the motion to refer item 10 to the Legislative and Rules Committee. I will call for a voice vote. All those in favor of referring item 10 to the Legislative and Rules Committee, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. Item 12, the last of the items before us tonight, is now before us. Mary Ferry, District 5.
Good evening. Item 12 is a sense of the meeting resolution regarding general fund borrowing, which was put on the call by petition. Whereas the town faces a challenge in holding the mill rate increase to the 3.5% range while addressing a large and growing want for infrastructure replacement and enhancements, and doing these within a 5-year pay-as-you-go debt constraint. And whereas RTM members are concerned about fiscal restraint, and whereas the RTM desires to inform the BET regarding its thinking insofar as operating and capital expenditures and their effect on the mill rate and borrowing. Now therefore the RTM recommends that the BET maintain the annual mill rate increases in the 3 to 4% range over the next several years, limit borrowing for capital expenditures payable from taxes, including revenue bonds, to maturities not greater than 5 years in total, including bond anticipation notes issued to fund the project during construction, and not capitalize ban interest for general obligation bonds. This resolution does not apply to borrowing which is outside the general fund, such as Nathaniel Witherell and sewers. It is as it appears on the call.
Thank you. Will member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 12 has been moved and seconded. May we get the reports of the committees considering this? We'll begin with Mr. Brady with the Education Committee.
Item we considered this last Monday night. Item 12 is a sense the meeting resolution recommending limiting the tax rate increase, the term of borrowing to 5 years total, 2-year construction, 3-year takeout, and expensing not capitalizing interest during construction. The Education Committee members were generally sympathetic with the objectives of limiting expenses and giving guidance to the First Selectman and the BET. However, it does not believe this resolution accomplishes the objective. Specifically, while limiting a tax rate increase, it does not limit the amount of borrowing. There is also no statement of what the effect of the resolution's implementation would be on the capital budget over the next several years. The committee voted 0 in favor, 8 opposed, and 4 abstaining to recommend approval, or recommend disapproval in this case. Those abstaining felt they had insufficient information about the effect of the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug Wells with the Legislative and Rules Report.
Item 12 was taken up in a joint session with Education, Finance, Land Use, and Public Works last Monday evening. Mary Ferry spoke in favor of this item at that meeting. During our discussions there, Mr. Walco and other members of the BET were present. I don't remember who it was, but somebody put a question to Mr. Walco about whether or not he'd had the opportunity to look into what this sense of the meeting resolution would mean in terms of a cost analysis and what it would mean in terms of funding the capital projects that are on the agenda. He said that he had not had the opportunity to do that, but he said that one of the outcomes might be pushing out some of the items on the CIP list. When we had this discussion in our own committee meeting room, it was clear that many on our committee were concerned with the fact that the BET had not had the opportunity to concern the implications of this sense of the meeting resolution and give us an analysis of what the implementation could save us and what it might cost us. Without that empirical data available to our committee, a majority felt that we should not act on the resolution until we had given the BET the opportunity to provide us with that analysis. We therefore heard and seconded a motion to postpone this resolution to our October meeting for the purpose of obtaining the BET's comments regarding this sense of the meeting resolution. At the appropriate time, I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Pam Frederick with the report of the Finance Committee.
Okay, Mr. Moderator, members and guests.
Unless we all think now is the appropriate time.
Oh, yes.
Okay. All right.
I thought you'd never ask.
Mr. Wells.
Our motion to postpone was, and Mary Ferry was also a member of our committee that evening. Our motion to postpone this item was 8 in favor, 3 opposed, with 1 abstention. That abstention was entered by Mary Ferry. I, for one, voted against the motion to postpone because I felt that we should let the BET know whether or not a majority of our members were in favor of this resolution before we required them to go through the exercise. But I'm sure they'll do it anyway. So that was our vote, 8-3-1.
All right. With the indulgence of our committee chairs, is there anyone who has a serious objection to proceeding at this point with the vote on the motion? Oh.
I have a motion from our committee.
All right. I will now accept that motion. It being offered on behalf of one of our committees, it does not require a second. So what is currently before us is the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to postpone to our October meeting, but we can have discussion on that, and if you have something that you would like to share with us, Jerry Isaacson, Chair of our Health and Human Services Committee.
You want it?
You can tell us what you did if you would like to do that.
The committee has recommended that item 12 be referred to the Budget Overview Committee and to the Finance Committee for review and return with more specific numbers. Further, that there be a study of the impact on capital projects by going from a 7-year payback to 5 years. 11-1-0 was our vote.
All right. Let me just say this, so that we are all clear on the difference between a motion to postpone and a motion to refer. A motion to postpone has the effect, if adopted, of bringing back to us on the date in the motion the exact item that is currently before us. A motion to refer places the issue in the hands of the referring body. In this case, you heard, was a budget overview? Okay. Which would then have control of the item in terms of when it brought it back if we didn't have a report back date in the motion to refer. We can, so we now are on notice that we have these two competing proposals on how to dispose of item 12. We will take a vote on the motion to postpone first. If that is adopted, our business will be ended on item 12. If it is not, you know there is another motion coming. Is there any other committee chair who would care to offer any information now to the body as before we vote on the motion to postpone? Mr. Pam Frederick, Chair of Finance.
From Finance, just wanted to note that our committee voted 12-0-0 actually to also postpone until the October meeting to allow the BET to respond to the questions and concerns raised. We didn't feel that we had sufficient information to properly analyze the sense of the meeting resolution and wanted to have further discussion with the BET.
Thank you. Michael Petroselli, Chair of our Budget Overview Committee.
Thank you.
I spoke earlier this evening about some things we hope to do as a committee. This item certainly is part of those things, so we'd be happy to take it up. I prefer not to have to take it up specifically by October, but on this item, as a committee, we voted 2 in favor, 5 opposed, 2 abstentions, with 3 districts absent, basically because we needed to do more analysis and understand what's involved. So we'd be glad to take up the item. I can't promise to be back in October with the right answers, but we'd be glad to take it up.
Thank you. Mr. Von Keyserling, on behalf of our Appointments Committee.
Since we never ever get to talk about finance, I just had to give the report of the committee. We voted on this 1 in favor, 6 against, 2 abstentions. A lot of the reasons we felt that this was not a complete proposal, and the postponement, in my opinion, would probably satisfy a lot of the questions we had. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Delman, one of our stalwart volunteer television producers tonight, thank you for those services, along with Mr. Paul Curtis.
Thank you. I just want to give you the town services vote. It was 10-1-1 to postpone till October.
Thank you. Vince DeMarco with a report of the Transportation Committee.
Transportation Committee was also 10-0-0 to postpone.
Thank you. Peter Berg with the Land Use Report.
Land use vote on this was 5-5-2.
On the merits?
On the item as it appears on the call.
Thank you. David Mellick, Chair of our Public Works Committee.
534 as presented. The comments basically indicated this was not ready for prime time. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I know. Little out of order. Karen Sadekhan, Chair of our Parks and Rec Committee.
The committee chose not to take a vote. That was the vote they took, not to vote on it. 6-6, it didn't pass. We took no action.
Thank you. All right. Any further discussion on the motion to postpone? Mary Ferry, District 5.
I know you're anxious to go home, but please give me just a couple of minutes. Fred Baker and I arranged to bring the sense of the meeting resolution regarding borrowing to you because many of us are concerned about Greenwich's mounting debt and because it is impossible at the May budget meetings to set budget guidelines. As Peter Tessie enumerated the financial pressures facing the town, I will not repeat them. There's been lively and thoughtful discussion at committee meetings. A number of people have asked what the consequences would be if item 12 is adopted. Others have asked about the amount of ban interest. Today, Peter Minarski, Greenwich's comptroller, told us that Greenwich borrowed for the general fund $34,010,000 in January of this year. After adjusting for interest earned on the borrowed money before it's actually used to pay for construction, he estimated that the interest payable next January would be $312,296. The calculation is dependent on cash flow and interest rates and is too complicated to discuss in detail tonight. However, we will include it as background material in the October call if the item 12 is postponed. Committees have voted to recommend that item 12 be postponed until October in order to hear what the BET has to say. It is my understanding that if item 12 is postponed, the BET will discuss it tomorrow night. We would like the BET to provide such specifics as ban interest cost forecast for the next 3 budget years, what the town's debt would be with 5-year pay-as-you-go financing versus the 7-year period the BET appears to have moved to, the effect on the mill rate of the 5-year versus 7-year pay-as-you-go method, and Greenwich's total debt profile, including debt for such purposes as Nathaniel Witherell, sewers, potential aquarium land acquisition, and so forth. This would give RTM more insight into the consequences of adopting item 12 and allow us to decide whether or not we agree with the BET. We will support postponing item 12 and hope you will too. Thank you.
Thank you. Christine Edwards, District 8.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator and our colleagues. I just wanted to make one point on this. We're all looking at the mill rate. Everyone's trying to control the mill rate. But I've sat down with people whose assessments have in some cases doubled. So the mill rate's kept the same, but the taxpayers, some who are older citizens here who've been here all their lives, have seen their taxes go from $3,800 to $7,500. So I just wanted to say
the issue is postponement. So
the issue is postponement, but please wake up and see there are two parts. It's not just the mill rate, it's also the assessment, and we have to look at both of these things when we postpone. Thank you.
all right, I'm going to call for a voice vote on the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to postpone item 12 to our October meeting. If you want to consider some other motion or consider this further tonight, you should vote no. If you want to put it off until October to allow comments from the BET, you should vote yes. All those in favor of the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to postpone item 12 to our October meeting, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. That motion has carried. Now, before we leave, let me announce the vote on item 8, which was the contract with LIUNA Board of Ed and the sense of the meeting resolution regarding that same contract. Those in favor, 133. Abstaining, 19. I'm sorry. Those in favor, 133. Opposed, 19. Abstaining, 10. That item has carried. I believe that now takes care of everything on our agenda. Now, 2 reminders. You all received a notice of a meeting called by the Planning and Zoning Commission on September 25th. That's a week from Thursday, I believe, correct? Yes. A week from Thursday. Is that what I said? Yes. And that is here, I believe, for the purpose of allowing RTM members to comment on the draft plan of conservation and development. And of course, October 19th, we will not meet before then. An opportunity to socialize with fellow members, to meet those who have come before us. So we hope to see you all in October, 2 to 5, Greenwich High School Student Center. There being no further business to come before the meeting and absent objection, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all for coming, and have a safe trip home.